Hello and welcome to the Rare Diseases Summit brought to you by IHW Council. I'm Anisha Nayadhavan, your host for this show. First things first, let's first understand what are rare diseases. While the universal definition of what constitutes rare diseases is still elusive, the World Health Organization, the WHO, defines them as diseases that are debilitating, lifelong disorders that whose prevalence is less than 1% per thousand. So you must be wondering, why is there such a big hullabaloo over a disease that affects a small subset of the population? Well, we need to talk about rare diseases because they're hardly given any attention in the country when it comes to drug development and treatment. In India, nearly 70 to 90 million people suffer from them, and around 80% of the rare diseases are genetic in origin and therefore disproportionately affect children. Less than 10% of patients with rare diseases receive treatment, and only 1% are managed using an approved treatment plan. IHW Council has been steadfast in healthcare advocacy, and today we bring the Rare Diseases Summit to highlight the broad challenges faced by rare disease community in the country, the lack of awareness amongst the medical and scientific community, and address the hurdles to treatment. In our first discussion of the day, we will be decoding the rarity of rare diseases and talk about overcoming shortfalls in awareness, information, and understanding. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed speakers for this session. Please welcome Dr. Madhulika Kabra, Professor, Genetics, Subdivision of the Department of Pediatrics, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. Dr. Ashok Gupta, Senior Professor and Chief Rare Diseases Center, SMS Medical College, India. Mr. Prasanna Kumar Shirol, Co-founder and Executive Director, ORDI. Dr. Ashwin Dalal, Head Diagnostics Division, CDFD. Dr. Rakesh Mishra, Director, Tata Institute of Genetics and Society. Thank you all for joining us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show. Dr. Madhulika, let me start with you. What are the key factors that lead to delaying diagnosing rare genetic diseases in India, and what can be done to streamline the diagnostic process?
Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank IHW Council for involving me in this panel discussion. So before I answer your question directly, I would just like to state that this diagnostic delay is not confined to India. I mean, it is more in India because of many factors which we'll be discussing. But even in the Western world, many studies have shown that the diagnostic delay may be up to 4 to 5 years or even more. Literature from India is not that abundant, but then maybe it's around average of 7 years when we look at India. Presently, with the availability of many new genomic diagnostic tests, this diagnostic yield has improved. But despite availability of all these advanced technologies available, even the diagnostic yield in centers where the cases are very carefully chosen, the yield of these tests may be up to 40% or 40 to 50%. So I think this we have to keep in mind that this is a global scenario, and still in the best situations, we may not be able to make a diagnosis. So I'll just quote one Spanish study which shows that before we go to the Indian scenario, in a Spanish study, which is quite recent, where they just tried to find out that what are the causes of these delay. Interestingly, the travel time, which we think that it is only probably confined to a country like ours, had a very important role to play with the odds of about 2%. And odds of about 2. And second thing is that the multiple visits to different specialists, because before the diagnosis is made, the odds, and this is average of about 10 specialists before we can have a diagnosis. And here the odds were more than 2.6. And interestingly, if the disease involved the central nervous system, the odds were much higher for a late diagnosis. So these are some of the results from the Western world. Now, coming to the Indian scenario, I think there are many things which we will have to consider, and I'll try to sort of in parallel answer that how can we take care of that. So there are no clear answers, and we really have a long way to go. So the first thing is the medical education, which we all need to understand. Rare diseases, genetic disorders, because 80% of them are genetic disorders. This has to be integrated in the medical curriculum, and it is happening gradually, but it has to probably be strengthened more, both at the level of undergraduates, postgraduates, and so on, even nursing, and the training of the peripheral health workers. And here the stakeholders obviously are NMC, various experts, governments, and institutions. And we really need to come together, and actually a lot of work is going on in this area. Second thing is the awareness, which we are probably focusing most in this particular session. So here the awareness starts not only from the medical professionals, but from the public. So here, I think we really need to make public aware about rare disorders, when do they need to consider, and this really needs to be opened up through various ways like media and things like that. And the peripheral health workers need to be educated. They really need to learn when to suspect these disorders, when to refer, where the red flag signs. So this awareness would start from the public, then the healthcare workers at all levels. I mean, it is not that only peripheral level healthcare workers are not aware. There are healthcare workers, even in the medical profession, and there is, I mean, they should not be blamed because our curriculum is not made like that. And anywhere in the world, everybody would not know about the rare diseases. Even people who are dealing with day in and day out, they may not diagnose a rarest of the rare disorder. So here, the role players or the stakeholders would be the centers of excellence, which we will be probably talking about later, other institutions which need to play a role in increasing awareness, and media. And here I think we really need to make very clear that at what level, what kind of information has to be there, and they need to learn that which are the cases which are to be suspected and where to refer. And I would request you to refer to one of the IAP guidelines which have been made for intellectual disability and global developmental delay, where these levels have been defined, that at the peripheral level, what do we expect? At the district hospital level, what do we expect? At the state medical college, and then so on. So I think this is a good way to do it. The third thing which I think we need to consider is the cost, availability, accessibility of the test, and the availability of the experts, and also the quality of the test, quality assurance for the test. I think this is another very, very important thing. So I'm happy to see that most of the tests are now available in India. We really need not go out and send these samples out. And basically the availability of genomic tests have really made it simpler. But having said that, there are multiple laboratories available, and we really need to, maybe at the national level, have to have a quality assurance for these tests and the type of reporting, what all needs to be done. So this is actually here the role of many people come, including the government, the centers of excellence, which tests should be available at what level, what screening tests can be done at the peripheral level. And I'm sure many labs are there in the periphery, state medical colleges, which can take care of many tests. And then the tests which are at the higher level have to be done at a maybe bigger institutions and the centers of excellence. And here, the more labs should be available in the public sector. They are more in the private sector now, because there's a possibility of subsidizing these tests. And also, you must be aware that many government schemes are being worked on, for which even diagnostic, help for diagnostic services is being thought of through various, I mean, this discussion is going on that how do we bring diagnostics also in the purview of these government supported schemes. Then the fourth point is, which I consider very important, is the lack of a well-defined referral system. So from the periphery where the patient should go, then from the district hospital to the state medical college and the centers of excellence. So now, you know, there are 11 centers of excellence available. And how do we connect the peripheral health system to the district health system, to the state medical colleges, to these centers of excellence? And here again, I think centers of excellence and various institutions are going to play a role. And then obviously NGOs, parent groups, governments, all of us have to come together and just integrate it with the healthcare system. And the last point, which I would like to emphasize, is that still, despite the fact that we have many trained geneticists in the country, pediatric neurologists, and many more who take care of these rare diseases. There's still a need to have more, and we have to stress on the judicious use of these tests, because these tests should not be used as a over-the-counter test. Particularly, I'm talking about the genomic testing like whole exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing, so that we do not have at the end of the journey, when we have done the test and we are not able to interpret the test, or we are not able to counsel the family. So it is important to have a system of referral and consult people who are working in this area before ordering a test. So I think at this point in time, I'll just stop here and I can pitch in between if required. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, ma'am. Dr. Gupta, I want to ask you, ma'am has spoken about, the lack of awareness about these diseases, not just in the medical community, but also the general public. How many people in our country are aware of rare diseases, and what are you doing to increase awareness, coordination, and implementation of rare disease policies and programs at the state level in India?
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting question. And the outset once again, thanking the IMW, which has given us an opportunity to be here on the issue of rare disease. And the question that you rightly raised was how we create awareness, how do people know that there is a rare disease? And this was exactly the kind of question when I got into rare disease 10 years back, because we were never aware of the rare disease, and some of we lost our patients, and that really made us more sensitive. And we started working into this field. And as I got into the program, what we realized was there were very little textbooks available to understand what investigations to be done, how do you identify a rare disease patient, and how do you really treat these patients. So a lot of lack of awareness even amongst the medical fraternity. So all said and done, yes, the awareness is very much less to the medical fraternity, and once medical fraternity is not aware, it's very difficult for the policymakers and the other people to be influenced about rare disease. So I represent the state of Rajasthan. I'm a regional player in the field of rare disease. But we have our own hazards, and I will just take you briefly through how we have been able to do things in a manner which has been able to bring the whole issue of rare disease as a mainstream issue with the government of Rajasthan. Rajasthan represents almost 10% of the total land area of the country. So we are fairly large with 3.42 lakh kilometers. So we have our problem of distances, and that is why to make people aware, because if you have a centralized institution as what Madhvik said was centers of excellence, centralized institutions will not be able to cover a state of Rajasthan, which is so widely spread, and 75% of our people live in the rural area. So what we decided was, one, to develop a center in the medical school, which is the apex institution in the state. So it was SMS Medical College Jaipur that we started working on. We developed a dedicated program on rare disease, and we built up a team of consultants who joined together from diverse backgrounds, including transplant to metabolic disorders to genetics. And once we had this group in place, we started training doctors, and in the last 10 years, we have trained almost 250 pediatricians in the field of rare disease, and over 1,200 medical graduates. We have sensitized them. So this has become a big pool of individuals to become more informed. So one of the things that I have always felt is that medical schools will need to play a bigger role in terms of sensitizing and developing the awareness about rare disease. And the second thing that we did was we worked with the state government, because the state government or we have been on the advisory board that they listened to us. And so we did create a special portal for rare disease patients, which is known as Rajasthan. Rajasthan state has been one of the first states in the country where you have the right to health as a basic fundamental right given to all the citizens. And so when we got into this portal, we now have a crowdfunding portal dedicated to rare disease. So the awareness has been spread through all the primary health centers, where we have put up posters identifying those features. If you have it in your patient, please think of a rare disease and refer this patient for an appropriate investigation. And as rightly been identified, because you need to have a system in place where early identification and timely referral, because most of these rare disease patients, if there is a delay in referral, you would sometimes lose the benefit of treating these patients because there is a irreversible damage to the venous organ system. So it's been educating the medical community, educating the society to the support of media. Media has been very helpful in this respect. They've done a lot of stories, good stories, success stories. And when you have positive stories coming out of media, people are more inclined to use the rare disease therapies and other things. So it's been public education, policymaker education, and educating the medical fraternity. These are the three things that we have done, so that yes, Rajasthan has been able to bring in a lot of big change in the field of rare disease.
Right. I'll come back to Dr. Madhurika because she has some prior engagements and has to leave. Ma'am, we heard sir talk about, having a portal. What role do you think that digital health plays in improving the access to specialized genetic services for patients in remote areas of our country, especially, for those people who have rare diseases? Because access to healthcare in remote parts of our country remains an issue for all kinds of diseases.
Yeah, so this is actually very important, but then I think we really need to be cautious also about this. So the first thing is that if we bring this networking in place, which we were discussing and Dr. Ashok was also saying, so some state medical colleges in between, connecting the centers of excellence to the state medical colleges and identifying medical specialists who are interested in then the state medical college or even in at the district level. So what I am concerned about is, and I think most of us who are practicing clinical genetics, because rare diseases are primarily genetic in origin. So the first contact and the first diagnosis may be at times difficult unless it's a very, very typical case if we just have a digital consultation. But having said that, if the disease is suspected and if there is a medical professional who is coordinating this consultation with the family members, with the patient, with all the reports in hand, I think it can be easily done. But it has to be done in a way that the messages go very clear. Right, because there are many issues here when we are talking of rare genetic disorders. First, maybe the diagnostic issues. Second would be if you make a diagnosis, what needs to be done, if treatment is available. If treatment is available, is it accessible or not? And finally, if at all we are able to make a diagnosis, and in that situation, how to prevent risk of recurrence, and many, many ethical issues, psychological issues, and so on. So this consultation can definitely be done through digital media. But what I feel is that a direct interaction with the maybe if you want an expert consultation, there have to be few more people who are also experts in this area and they are taking care of this particular patient. And the follow-up consultations can definitely be digital once the patient has been seen physically. And another thing which I would like to emphasize here, that for complex cases where the diagnosis is not straightforward, where there are family complexities, where we are not able to interpret a report properly, even after all the tests have been done, I think in that situation, a physical consultation with the concerned is definitely important. But then, having said that, with all the reports, patient there, a consultant there, expert there, and with the family members there, it can definitely be done. It would be much easier for the family because they do not have to travel long distance.
Right. I want to come to you, Prasanna. What are the new methods or best practices being implemented to create awareness about rare diseases amongst policymakers, amongst healthcare workers, amongst the general public? And can these models be replicated and scaled up across different regions in India?
Okay, thank you, Anisha. I would like to thank ISW Council for this opportunity and arranging this very important topic discussion. So I think Dr. Madhulika Kabra has already covered most of the points which need to be, replicated. And yes, and she also said, the problems are common. Yesterday I was in Dubai where 8 countries stakeholders met. Everybody has the same challenges, but in India we do have a different challenges. One of the main challenges is the consultation with the government is missing here. We meet them only once in a while wherever there are programs, but there are no government-sponsored, government-initiated consultation with the policymakers and other stakeholders. Especially the parents and patient groups are not involved on a consistent basis. Once in a while they do it. Maybe some bureaucrats who are interested, personal interest, they organize. But that is important because when we are talking about a starting point, only when the patients being the main center of the activity and initiated then the policy can take place and form. I think this need to be replicated in India and also at all level, not just with the central government. Health is a state subject. State government need to be involved, which is very, very important for long term. Today we have a policy for central government, but state government has completely kept away from this. So I think right from ZP level, MLA, MC need to be aware about the problems. There has to be discussion at every level. They know their problems, territory problem, then the state secretaries, and secretary, when we talk about, we only talk about health secretaries, but there are other departments which can make impact. Disability department for issuing a disability card, wheelchair, supportive care, social and justice. So I think overall strategy of all the involved department consultation is one must and need to be initiated in India so that a long-term comprehensive policy can be discussed and taken. Then creation of fund is very important, because any activity without a fund do not bring the seriousness, both from the government side or from the other stakeholders. I think that fund need to be created at every state and department so that something can start moving. Then coming to healthcare professionals, Dr. Kabra talked about medical education. Yes, we cannot now blame that. But bridging courses, I think there is one course which ICMR conducts by SGPGI called Pedigree to Genome. I think those kind of courses need to be more in every state and regularly, so that government should make an effort that at least one doctor in each hospital is aware about genetic problem, which is a doable. And regularly they can ensure that all the doctors from different specialties are exposed to genetics and rare diseases. Then only the referral systems become stronger. Then the earlier diagnosis also can help. And also importantly is, when the young doctors, interns are going out of the institute, we need to have a small course, at least to make awareness before they get into practice or they get into the field. Then today awareness programs or CME programs, mostly by pharma companies, patient groups in the wherever disease specific groups are active, and also sometime by the hospital. But there are no official CME programs where government is involved and government doctors are involved. And all these initiatives, what we conduct, it is only towards the private sector. But the government doctors, hospitals, district hospitals are completely away from these kind of initiatives. And of course, the genetic counseling centers and facility need to be, exhaustive in every hospital, at least in the district places to start. And talked about referral system, which is very, very important. There has to be an SOP for a normal doctor if he's not able to diagnose what next, where he has to refer, who is a doctor in the state or country, who is a specialist. I think those SOPs can definitely, give clarity to all the doctors, general doctors. Then just for example, once, way back in 2013, we conducted a CME for government doctors, where government sent out a letters to all the district hospitals. Doctors attended. With
But I think we're having a little of a
now
connectivity
coming to
issue. Prasanna will come back to you. We're having a problem listening to what you said, but you raised
general public, definitely mass awareness, social media, polio ka do bund advertise. Hello, can you hear me?
We're having some problems with your issue. We'll come with your audio. We'll come back to you, Prasanna. Thanks for the points that you've made.
Okay.
Dr. Mishra, let me come to you. Now, Prasanna has raised important points about coordination, about SOPs. What strategies and initiatives can be undertaken to foster collaboration and knowledge sharing among researchers, clinicians, and patient advocacy groups who are working on rare diseases in India?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for this organizing this event. It's very, very important. And I also thank you for having this panel where we have really very relevant specialists who are already contributing. So as you have heard, it's a big problem and which needs to be addressed. But so there's a big challenge. But at the same time, we are in a point where biology has made tremendous progress. Particularly in the areas of genomics, which means we can do genome sequencing at it's almost at a price that any individuals can pay most of the time. And in future, certainly is going to be very, very affordable. and even genome editing, which means if there's error in the genome, we can fix it. And in parallel, also cell biology, particularly stem cell biology, has made tremendous progress and entering into the domains of treatment more frequently. Many examples are there. So these three technologies are enabling us to change the scene completely. Many of the problems can be solved using this technology. And we are a country who have done things at a scale. In many times, we keep doing lots of things at a scale. So many of these things can be incorporated in our healthcare system, where genomic approaches can be used for helping at a population scale. We can go into those details in a bit, but what I would like to say is that for achieving that, even if we have technology, we need to have the takers of the technology, the final target of the technology, are stakeholders on the board from the beginning. So here it means clinicians, along with, so when I say technology, I mean researchers. They are doing in the lab sequencing frequently, genome editing on a regular basis. But when it comes to translation, it doesn't go very far, because we don't have on board oftentimes clinicians connected with the relevant patients, and importantly, industry. Your science can reach people only if there is a industry that can translate it, scale it up, and take it there. And there has to be economic viability. Otherwise, things will stay, and we are talking in a impractical or non-practical scenario. So these are actually now possible. We can reduce the cost of things by order of magnitude. We have shown it recently in case of COVID, and we have begun this activity. I think all the speakers here have been part of previous year activity, what we call as a redress, where relevant people. It was also really initiated by Prasanna, where all the relevant people, researchers, clinician, patient group come together. And there we saw that there is a capability, there's of course urgent need, and there is desire, really sincere desire to solve this problem. So that means we are very much there. We have technology, we have people, we have takers, and we need to work with the policymakers, we need to work with the regulators. And lots of these technologies are actually knocking the door, both in terms of diagnostics and also the new therapeutic approaches, which we can discuss later, like mRNA therapeutics, other, which will be really, really affordable. We are right now frightened by the cost of the treatment of rare genetic diseases. But I can tell you the new technology will make that affordable like any other disease treatment. We are almost reaching there. But as I said, technology may be there, and the targets are there. But to connect the gap, we will need policy and regulatory system to join, and which I see a desire from all the directions. I think we are in a very important transition point where everybody knows what to do and things are converging. And I really hope that not in years, but in months, we will start seeing really visible progress in these areas.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mishra. Let me come to you, Dr. Dalal. Dr. Mishra is very, very upbeat about progress being made, especially the advancements in genomics. Would you like to tell us, how are these advancements in genomics helping in the identification and understanding of novel rare diseases in India? What are you seeing in your practice? And are you also as hopeful that, soon these tests will become very affordable, and, all this will be, also the findings will be translated into clinical practice also soon enough?
So thank you. Everything in rare diseases actually begins with the correct diagnosis. And there was a time few years back when we could not diagnose many of these disorders. But the recent advancements have made it possible that almost more than 50% of the diseases we are able to diagnose now, and that too at a much lower cost. When these genomic technologies came into clinical practice, they were quite expensive, and very few people could benefit from them. But as the drastic decrease has happened in the cost of sequencing, we are able to sequence exomes and whole genomes at much lower cost compared to earlier times, and that too at multiple places throughout the country. So we have multiple government as well as private labs offering these services now, and there is no excuse now for any clinician not to diagnose a patient with rare disease. The funds are available both, either patients spend their own funds or through government institutes. There are various facilities available through which I feel every rare disease the patient needs to be diagnosed. That is the first step before going on to either counseling, prenatal diagnosis, or therapy of these disorders. And today we can get a exome sequencing at most of the labs in the range of about 13,000-14,000, and slowly genome sequencing is becoming cheaper and cheaper. And it's not far away that probably the $100 genome, what is the dream for many of the companies as well as scientists, is there, and it is surely going to be true. And with advances in even in genome sequencing, always every test has its own disadvantages. So we are now having much better technologies like optical genome mapping or long read sequencing, which are again helping us to increase the yield of these genetic tests. So hopefully we should be able to diagnose at least 80-90% of these genetic disorders in future.
So, Dr. Dalal, you are also sounding very upbeat about the improvements being made in diagnosis of rare diseases. Dr. Madhulika, are there any specific research initiatives or studies in India that have significantly advanced our understanding of a particular rare disease? And are there any lessons that can be learned from these examples to accelerate research in other rare diseases? Ma'am, you're on mute. We request you to unmute yourself.
So as we understand that the awareness has really improved over years, if you at all levels, I must say. So and same is true for the research area also, and various government institutions are actually really promoting research in the area of rare diseases. So I would just give you some examples which have really helped helped all of us in taking these diseases forward. So the diagnosis of these diseases forwards and the availability of diagnostics has become available in India. So like I would give you an example of some initial projects like multicentric task force projects by the ICMR, which includes newborn screening projects, and a very important project on lysosomal storage disorders where multiple centers were involved, including Ashwin was involved from CTFT, and almost all lysosomal storage disorders were worked on, and we do now have the facilities for diagnosing these disorders in some parts of the country. And this, as you were saying, it is not translated, the research is not translated, it is now becoming more and more feasible to have a diagnosis for these disorders. Another very important initiative which I would like to mention here is called Ummeed, which is a DBT funded project. And here the importance is the connect for genetic services at the periphery, at the district level, at the aspirational district levels. So many institutions are involved here in this, and each institution has actually adopted one aspirational district. Like again, Ashwin is involved in this, we are involved in this, we are working in Haridwar. And here there is a screening, as I was telling you, that the peripheral health workers and the doctors in the district hospitals are being trained that how to identify these rare diseases. Newborn screening is going on there, antenatal high risk screening is going on there. And this is really, it was a big learning for all of us that how can we connect these genetic services at the peripheral level. Apart from this, there are many more programs going on. One of this is India Undiagnosed Rare Disease Network, which Dr. Ratna Puri from Gangaram Hospital is coordinating. Then there are many task forces from the ICMR for rare diseases, for gene therapy, DBT Genome India initiative, you must be aware, a lot of work is going on, 10,000 genomes are being sequenced. And then there is a national consortium on research and development of therapeutics by the ICMR, and then multiple centers are involved for developing therapeutics. And then there is a program which is led by Ashwin's team again, is a mission program on pediatric genetic disorders. It's a DBT funded program. And the aim is, as Ashwin was saying, to diagnose rare diseases I mean, as much as possible. So it is kind of a hub and spoke kind of a program where there are CDFDs coordinating. There are many institutions which are getting referrals, and those referral institutions are connected to smaller institutions and at the periphery. So this program is going in, and there are many more which are coming up. So I must say that a lot of work has gone in. The government has funded really well, and the aim of the government is not only to make these diagnostic facilities available for all the patients, but improve in therapeutics. And they want to really support the Make in India concept, which is going on. So we are all hopeful that this will really become true, and all of us have to work hard in this area. Thank you.
Right. It does sound like a lot of work in the research side is already underway. Dr. Dalal, what are the challenges in ensuring quality and reliability of genetic testing? And what steps are being taken to have some form of standardization here?
So yeah, this is true of any medical testing that would happen, and genetic testing is just one type of medical testing. What I feel is the problem in India is that we really don't have any regulation as of whatever medical genetic or any medical testing goes on, that anybody is able to open a lab and provide the test. So the only accreditation that we have in India is the NABL, but that also is voluntary. So it's not really a requirement for any lab to have the accreditation. However, having accreditations helps to improve your credibility in the market, and that's why many of the bigger labs do go for such a thing. And that helps you to improve your protocols, your procedures, and also from regulatory point of view, it's really difficult to do anything about it. And mostly that's why then everyone goes by what's the popularity or what's the credibility of a particular lab, and then they would send the samples there. So what can be done mainly is that we all try and follow international guidelines that have been put by either the American College of Medical Genetics or the European guidelines, and that is how we try to do the diagnostic tests in the best possible way, so that we are able to provide a correct diagnosis. But yeah, it's difficult to regulate or ensure that the correct diagnosis only happens in all labs. But through all these societies and through a lot of training programs, that we try to spread this awareness about importance of diagnosis, and hopefully as more and more of such diagnostic testing happens, the labs will become more and more credible and able to provide a correct diagnosis.
All right, so we discussed a lot about the diagnosis and the work underway in R&D. Dr. Mishra, I want to talk a little bit about the treatment also. How can precision medicine approaches and personalized therapies be integrated into the healthcare system to optimize the management and treatment of rare diseases in our country?
Right. Yeah. So we have been in scientific community talking about personalized and precision medicine now maybe 10 years or more. But I think now we are coming closer to it, because as Ashwin mentioned, and I also said that sequencing is becoming really affordable. I mean, you can imagine a scenario that you make a panel for all known or the disorders that can be diagnosed, including newborn or rare diseases. And you can run a panel in few hundred rupees, and all newborn can be screened. So I see that we are not very far. In maybe in a year or a couple of years, we will be in a position where government already gives us 20,000, 30,000, depending on state, money to all the pregnant women, and a fraction of that can be used. So you are ready to welcome the baby with the full prepared stage. And we can even imagine practical situation where you can do a prenatal diagnosis, non-invasive, and take a decision and think of significantly reducing the disease burden. So these are the outcomes of new technology. Now, as I said, the industry, the technology, if it is taken by industry in a commercially viable manner, affordable manner, then it can reach people. And that is one of our problem and our advantage also being a country where we have advantage of number and also disadvantage when lots of people, 90 million people having this disease. So that becomes a really a big issue. So what we have to do to bring genome-based diagnostics affordable to people, because that's the key thing. And this country has demonstrated when COVID came, we were paying thousands of rupees for tests, 2,000, 3,000. Today, everything has been indigenized thanks to research institutions and industry partners. You have production cost of COVID tests has become less than 20 rupees. It's just amazing. Orders of magnitude difference that comes when you indigenize and use innovation. And this, there is no reason why we cannot reduce the cost and diagnosis of rare genetic diseases by tenfold. It's very straightforward mathematics. Companies take 80% of the cost as their R&D cost. If we are developing in the government institutions or non-profit organizations, this thing will be 80% cheaper without losing any money for the sale and other necessary thing, some profit, otherwise it will not reach the people. So affordability is something which we can work on and we can reach there. And once this genomic information is in hand, we have technology. You can take cells from individuals and make iPSC in matter of couple of months. You can, once you know the diagnosis has been done, then actually in 6 months, you can come with a package for the individual's treatment. So iPSC cell ready, disease and the disease ready. Of course, it will all depend on the disease. It will not be available for 100%, but for significant number. And you have mRNA therapeutic package with toxicity test available in matter of weeks. So we are reaching a situation where we will have all these options available to people at affordable cost, because technology will be available at platform scale. You're not going to do individual drug or individual patient. You have platform of technology. The moment you have a target, you can then put into the system, and in a matter of time, which is weeks or months, and you have the solution for the individual. As I've been telling earlier, we will require lots of interaction with policymakers and regulators to allow special provisions for these kind of disorders, because you will not have for a particular disease at a given time, you will not have such a large number that you can do regular trials or meet many other criteria. Of course, you need to have safe options, but once it is safe option, then there should be special provisions that allow us to take this technology to people. If we take the best of the technology available, involve industry in a manner that there is not much of profiteering, but people's concern is kept in the mind, and but is economically viable. And the regulatory system supports the industry, particularly small and medium industry. We don't have to support the international giants. I think we are reaching the solution where in coming years, we will be using the genomic information and therefore providing precision and personalized medicine touches to diseases, and hopefully rare genetic disease will be the first of them.
That's very heartening to know. There is a lot of optimism amongst all of you that technology is really changing the pace of diagnosis, of genome testing, and even treatment in the years ahead. Dr. Ashok Gupta, I want to ask you then, a lot of good is happening, but you want to try and understand that how this gels with the healthcare workers. What measures can be taken to strengthen the capacity of healthcare professionals, especially those in primary care settings, to recognize the early signs and ensure that there is timely referral and appropriate management of these rare diseases?
There's not a lot of good hope across the diagnostic for sure, because the turnaround time has also come down. Because at some point of time, the turnaround time used to be something like 5 to 6 weeks. Now it has come down to 2 to 3 days, and it may further come down. So there's been many good things happening at the scientific end. But at the same time, the way we can certainly get into having the peripheral workers also becoming sensitized to the issue of rare disease. I was trying to analyze the medical education in this country, and we all have almost 703 medical schools, and these medical schools are almost equally divided between the private and the government sector. So when the national policy was announced, the focus always has been on the government sector. So one of the things that I would appreciate from the government is that they should move out of the government sector, because you have almost equal partnership from the private medical colleges too. So one, so that it brings about your outreach to a much, much larger level. Secondly, the statistics across the country show that almost 70% of the rural people and 80% of the urban people, they rely largely on the private enterprise. So that means if you have to have the rare disease work really moving fast across all sectors at the peripheral level also, that means you need to bring in the private players also into the gamut of rare disease policy. Because our centers of excellence that we've identified so far are all level from the government institutions. And we have not been able to really move into the private enterprise. And so what happens is once you have all the medical schools open to treat patients, then 703 medical schools across the country are treating. You are sensitizing all the medical graduates who are getting through those institutions. And when these individuals, when they get out of the medical school, they at least have some basic knowledge. And these are the people who, some of them are going to work in the field in the peripheral areas also. So initial sensitization, as Madhulika at some point of time said, that yes, you need to develop a medical curriculum. I would say open the rare disease to all medical schools, let them develop their own programs, have a tie-up with the Center of Excellence, which is going to be something like a guiding force. Another important thing that you really raised was the digitalization, because the one has really become very easy to reach. This outreach from the digital world has made things much easier. So we could always have an advisory group or a panel which decides about the management and the diagnostics from all these medical schools. They can pull in their information and they can get guidance. So what happens is that you're educating all the medical schools in the country at one time. And then the way that we did in our own state, where we had the government operating through all the primary, the healthcare centers, the sub-centers and the district hospitals, where we are bringing in doctors and nurses from these institutions to train for a day or two in the tertiary center where rare disease is being treated, so that they come and see, they come and experience, and when they go back, at least they have a knowledge. The other thing was getting into reference, because again, rare disease patients are going to be very scattered across the country. Transporting them to a center of excellence means that, for example, when I said the state of Assam has one center of excellence, and you would transport somebody almost 600 kilometers, most people will not be able to do it. So we need to develop sensitization and the transport mechanism, wherein the government will have to play a role, where you have to support the transport mechanism. And then sensitizing these would also require a lot of support from the patient groups, and where Prasanna has really played a stellar role in the country. Because for me, there have been two big guiding forces in this country. One has been Prasanna and other has been Madhulika. These people from the medical fraternity and the patient groups have led the fight, and they really brought rare disease to the mainstream. So partnering with the patient groups, we can really have people becoming more knowledgeable, influencing the policy and transporting these patients. So this is again opening out rare disease beyond the centers of excellence.
All right, so Dr. Gupta is speaking about a model which is more decentralized and perhaps has the private sector's participation also in it. So Prasanna, let me come to you, because we want to try to understand how can we support the empowerment and engagement of patients and families affected by rare diseases. What is the role of patient-led initiatives in shaping policies and programs related to the diseases in India?
Very good question. Today, I think if you're talking about this rare disease in India, I proudly say it's all because of the patient groups initiative. Dr. Madhulika Kabra was talking about LSD task force. And that is the first work when we approached the ICMR, talked about the challenges of diagnostic. Then they started a LSD task force. Today, we talk about easy diagnosis, lower cost diagnosis of LSDs. And similarly, there are many areas. When you talk about awareness, I think it is a patient-led initiatives which has created awareness in length and breadth of this and by everybody. Okay. Then when we talk about patient care, we started rare disease daycare ward in Indira Gandhi Institute of Childhood from 6 years back, and today 80 patients take treatment in that. I think it's one successful model of PPP, private, public, and patient group coming together and forming it. which is provided. Then helpline. Like this, we can talk about many things. And more importantly, the patient registry. Patient initiatives can play a bigger role in patient registry. Today, some of the groups have few hundreds, few thousand patient group that can immediately incorporated in ICMR, and then we generate certain data, because always the rare disease data which we talk about, and which is the stimulus to initiating a research, bringing the focus on the pharma companies and other things. And also in studying the natural history data, already patient groups are doing that. I think it is only the attitude and focus from both the side coming together, and we can create a better model. Then another important is research. We have seen many patient group in India, especially in the DMD space, GNE myopathy. They already started research centers. They have invested. They have raised funds. I think this is where government also has to extend their hand, come together, and ensure that whatever patient has started, it gets certain support and the whole model. Today we see the entire DMD group. DMD patients are on the roads doing many activities to draw the attention of the policymakers. I think we can utilize them better to form better policy and also to support the patient on a long-term basis. And another important area is capacity building. See, a non-profit organization or a patient group like us exist to fill certain gaps. Okay, we cannot replicate. We have certain resources and we can do that. Till such time government comes up with a full-fledged support system, we can fill that gap. For example, now we support few COEs with a manpower so that the COE can expedite the things faster manner, and there is a support system and there is a non-medical support system. Later on, government can chip in. I think we can talk about many initiatives, and as I stated earlier, all the initiatives in India have started from patient groups.
That is amazing, and that is a great achievement of the patient groups. Dr. Madhulika, could you tell us about some of the treatment protocols as well for these rare diseases? As I understand, not a lot of research is done. Not many innovator companies are working on some of the solutions, and even the treatment remains quite expensive. Is indigenous research being done in treatment of some of these rare diseases in our country?
Yeah. So as I told you, there are many. The government is really trying to support research in the area of therapeutics. In fact, lately, many of the calls for research have been actually targeted for therapeutics, which is true for DST calls, from DBT calls, and even from the ICMR calls. So the issue is that the drugs, if we sort of try and divide the therapies for rare disorders very, very broadly. So based on the kind of requirement for therapy would be something like a one-time requirement, which would be something like transplants, like bone marrow transplants, liver transplants, and other transplants. And second would be disorders for which the treatment cost is not very expensive but is lifelong. So this would include, say, small molecule disease where special diets are required, some other treatment like for primary immunodeficiency syndromes, for metabolic liver diseases, and so on and so forth. So for the first two, facilities are available, and there is a move towards strengthening these facilities towards care of rare diseases. Like, for example, bone marrow transplantation is being done for many disorders in the country, but then doing it for rare diseases like lysosomal storage disorders and all really needs some initiative and strengthening this area, the regimens to be formed. And as a part of the rare disease policy activity, this is being done, that a consortium will look after this. The second group of disorders where, say, for example, we are talking of special medical foods. Here, actually, there are already indigenous foods available made by Indian companies, and these are much cheaper than the Western countries, and these are being used routinely. And there are many such efforts going on in the country presently on research basis, so that this kind of treatment can be sort of made available in India. The examples, apart from these special medical foods, include treatment for tyrosinemia, where NTBC is the drug, and there are Indian companies which have come up, and there is research going on because the raw material is available for this. Then this the last group of diseases where the most the critical and the most difficult part. So these are very expensive drugs, like treatment for DMD, where various kinds of treatments are being used, like exon skipping and treatment for spinal muscular atrophy. So you will be happy to know that now there are many groups working in this area also for indigenously making these drugs. And the government is actually supporting these initiatives. There are programs and projects which are in the process of being funded for making these in India. This is true both for the spinal muscular atrophy treatment and for the DMD treatment also. And apart from that, the other important area is the enzyme replacement therapy, where we really need to make more efforts to have that drug produced in India, because there are very, very specific requirements for that, and the production cost is very high. But then in all these areas, work is going on, and I'm sure in coming years, we would be able to have many treatments available with the drugs which are indigenously prepared in India. Thank you.
Right. Again, very hopeful that all of these will happen soon enough so that drugs are available to those who require for the treatment of rare diseases in our country. Dr. Lal, what are the challenges in ensuring affordable and equitable access to some of these orphan drugs and specialized treatments in rare diseases in India? And how can you address some of these challenges?
Many of these drugs, the most important challenge is the cost when you are trying to import these drugs. So, as we have heard that none of these drugs are really manufactured in India. So some of the drugs which are available, they need to be imported, and since these are newly developed drugs, the cost is prohibitively high. So that is the first challenge, that when there are certain rare diseases where treatment is not available. There, the challenge is that new drugs need to be developed, but from a company perspective, they look at the number of patients who are going to take this drug or something, and hence they may not be interested in developing these orphan drugs. There are very few companies who come forward to develop, since drug development is a very long process, and a lot of funds are needed for development and then going through clinical trial and getting all the approvals. And all these funds the company expects to be returned, followed by profit or something. And so many of the companies really don't want to venture, and those who are venturing, they price the drug at such high prices that it is prohibitively expensive for patients in India to really get it. So the National Rare Disease Policy is one small initiative towards this, where Government of India has tried to make uh, to take care of this financial aspect by providing assistance of about 50 lakh rupees per patient for any of the therapies that are available. And that program has already started. A number of patients have already got these therapies from all the different centers of excellence. So these low-hanging fruit, we are able to help them, like mainly the feeds, special feeds that are needed for the amino acid disorders and the organic acid disorders. These are much more cheaper now because Indian companies are making it. Similarly, as Madhulika madam said, that regarding nitisinone, again, Indian companies are making, and the drug cost has fallen down almost 1/3 to 1/4. And so these are now easily available, and patients are able to take them. We hope that in future also the drug cost would fall down, and we hope that more Indian companies try to come up. We have a lot of pharma presence of pharma companies, but we don't really have people going into this, and I hope in future, and that's the push from both ICMR, DBT, as well as from Niti Aayog, to try and incentivize development of these novel drugs for rare diseases in India itself, which will be a great service to these patients in the long run.
All right. In India, the medical community has shown us that it can be done if the will is there. We've seen it with COVID. The will was there. We developed our own vaccine. We developed our own testing kits, etc. If you want to do it, it can be done. Dr. Mishra, is there any ethical or social considerations associated with genetic research and technologies in these kind of rare diseases? If yes, can these be addressed to ensure that there are responsible and equitable implementation of research for tests, for development of treatments? What's your
Right. Actually, you partly answered the question that you asked, that normally it takes vaccines several years, 7 year, 10 year in a very fast mode, otherwise decade and a half. But for the COVID, we got vaccine within a year. Of course, there has been some background work, all those things we can consider. But there were a few critical things that helped getting the vaccine that fast. And one of them was dealing with ethical and regulatory issues in a very special manner, which we call as emergency approvals and emergency usage approvals and so on. So there are multiple things have to fall in place, which is very much possible. So one is, for instance, we have to have a quality and safety ensured from the science point of view, so that and technology development. So science is very much there. Technology can be really brought in at a very fast pace, but that has to have the safety and quality in place. If those two things are there, then we have to think of how we can deliver this at the very fast pace to the patient. And that's where we have to think of what we have learned from COVID, that I will not call it calculated risk. If you're taking a product which you know is safe, then I think there should be a special provisions for such disease, for which you cannot do 1,000-person trial or even 100 people trial, because the patient number itself is so small. And with other and many times we reach a point where they are in an irreversible stage of various disabilities. So you can not look for really 100% cure, you look for improvements. With that itself is a big deal if you talk to patients. So that's why I'm very convinced that the rare genetic disease research community and clinician must be always in touch with patient groups, because that's what inspires you, that what all is required there, and also keep industry in you on the table, because the moment you develop something, it has to be taken to the people. Now the problem is, so suppose you have a safe product which has a variable outcome which you need to give to patient, but there are problem comes many times, as you just heard, big industries will not come because the scale is low, numbers is less. Small industries cannot come oftentimes because there is a IP issue or some patent is blocking their entry into this. That's where, as a national policy, we have to enter in a take very special steps. So, for instance, there is a case, you have an option, but you cannot deliver to the patient because some patent is blocking you. But the company itself cannot use it because it doesn't have intent to come and deliver for few people in India. Then we have to have our provisions that we can either have a deal with the company who has a patent, or do something else, avoid those, or do in a non-profit situation and so on. So I think those are the things that we have already begun now discussion. In past 3-4 years, there has been more awareness, thanks largely to the patient groups, and also science has improved. We can see now how we can interfere with that. As I was mentioning, you can think of now gene therapy using mRNA therapeutic approaches. So local gene therapy of affected tissues or affected cell types. So these are possibilities that are there. They can easily be tried, because once you have got the safety level or preclinical trials that you can do in normal patients or people, or in the animal system wherever it's available, or even there are organized systems that are available. So I think we need to reform our system and bring out some of those emergency provisions. For a patient, it is emergency. Every day the person is deteriorating. For a public, it may not be patient emergency, but for patient, it is. So we have to bring in those sensitivity in our rules and our regulations or policies, that if there is an option available which is safe, then how we facilitate small companies, medium companies to come and deliver this to people at a reasonable cost. And this reasonable cost, what I'm talking, will be really even out of pocket affordable. Something which you are talking about several lakhs will be just few hundred, because that's we have already demonstrated. I mean, you can think that mRNA vaccine production cost is $3. So why not ERP replaced by mRNA approach in few dollars? It's absolutely possible. So, and I'm sure these are going to be available very soon to our people. So we have to adapt to new technology, take them into consideration, and take the sensitivity that is required for the situation in because these are special cases. They will not be in thousands or millions in number. They will be maybe hundreds and sometimes even a smaller number. So we should have special provisions for them, both in terms of regulatory and safety and policy and many economic things dealing with companies and IPs and so on. And I think now we are aware of these things. And see, when I talk to a very high level policy people, they say, please come with solution, then we can look for how to solve it and tell the solution of it. So you have to go to the system with the solution. And I'm sure sooner or later, at least for some cases, we will start seeing the fruits of science reaching to people, and everybody's help will be required in that.
All right. So that does sound, hopeful about how things can proceed from here on. I want to come to you, Dr. Ashok Gupta. You've spoken about, the experience you've had in Rajasthan. So could you tell us how can we have successful collaborations between patient advocacy groups, public health institutions, private organizations, NGOs, so that, we can effectively support the diagnosis, treatment, and holistic care of patients with rare diseases? Could you tell us your experience in Rajasthan?
Thank you, Risha. Again, the word that you rightly use was holistic care, because without holistic care, you cannot do much about these rare disease patients, because just giving them therapy is just not enough. They require a lot of emotional support, they require physical support, they require financial support. So it's a fairly large issue that most of these rare disease patients really require. And so as we went through the program, the first thing that we did was to develop a rare disease registry, because we really wanted to document and tell the policymakers that we have a large number of people suffering from rare disease. It's not a small number, because the moment you say rare disease, they will say, oh, it's rare, why do you come? It's only affecting, say, very few people. The word rare sometimes misleads the policymakers. So when we started working on documenting, we would have a series of 200 children suffering from spinal muscular atrophy. We would have more than 250 children with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. These are big volumes. And why I really wanted to highlight the figures was because even the industry, the pharmaceutical industry in India, because they do not know the facts in terms of the volume, they will not be willing to risk investments in developing such drugs, which are now categorized as orphan drugs, for the patients suffering from such rare disorders. So what's important was, yes, to build up the figures. And so once we had the figures, because in a year we identified 1,322 rare disease patients. And believe me, almost 600 were ultra rare. Ultra rare are children who would be found as 2 to 3 per 100,000. So ultra rare, we had such a large number of ultra rare patients. Again, the big number of ultra rare patients attracted the global industries to come into Jaipur and to see a mechanism of partnership in terms of doing drug trials. So one of the things which we rightly did was to build up the numbers. Once we had the numbers, we went to the policymakers and we said, these are the patients and you need to support them. And that is where one very important thing happened, that even the legal system in the country gave directions to the state government, yes, please support these patients. And today, I'm really happy to say that we have almost 10 or 11 LSD patients on treatment on a regular basis. And this is a treatment which costs something like 40 lakhs rupees per child per year. It's a fairly big volume of money involved. But you still have the government doing it, because they now know that there is a reversibility. You have a treatment which is going to make them normal, and then there is a clear direction from the judicial system too. And then when we partnered with NGOs, there was another interesting thing when I said was getting into private medical schools. We developed a very interesting public trust partnership. What is a public trust partnership? Is we are a government institution. And so we have a large number of thalassemia and some of the rare disease patients who require stem cell transplant or bone marrow transplant. And this was a trust-run transplant program. They were not able to find patients. So what we said, we developed a partnership. The government supported the partnership. The government paid for all the transplants that happened there. So within a year, within the last 3 years, we have done almost 100 bone marrow transplants. So 100 bone marrow transplants in the government enterprise with a 90% success rate is unbelievable. But this is again because you have a trust. You have a trust hospital which was looking for patients. We had the government supportive, and then we had an institution which has big number of patients. So a combination of these three has brought in a big impact in terms of supporting the patient treatment. So it's been NGOs and the private institutions and also the government which has really joined hands. We have the only thing that we did was we created awareness on some of these rare disease awareness days. We created a human formation. We invited all the schools of the town to send children and form human formation of the rare disease logo. And so we had 4,000 children developing the human formation, and you had this chief minister seeing all that. So that's means you need to create visibility, you have to create figures, and you have to create solution. That is exactly what others have been saying. Once you go with the solution, then the government understands, yes, things can be done. So it was again a combination of multiple things happening together, which probably brings in a change. And why it is important is that if a state like Rajasthan, because again, health is a state subject across the country. So if one state is able to do, other states can easily duplicate that effort. And that is what we are trying to work in collaboration with other states like Uttarakhand to develop a rare disease program in those other states too.
Right. Thank you for those inputs, Dr. Gupta. It sure seems that a lot of stars have to align together for this program to run well for the sake of the patients. So, Prasanna, I'm going to leave the last word with you for this panel discussion. You know, what patients feel, what they communicate, and what their needs are very important to develop a program that really works for rare diseases in our country. Along with awareness, how can this communication happen?
I think, see, one is we have seen with the help of all the medical doctors how last over a decade we have come from zero state to now getting the treatment, the CO is in place, etc. Although it has not solved all the problem, but it will definitely solved a few of the problems, and it's a long way. Now coming to the next important thing is development orphan drugs. That is an important activity which need to be addressed. Because India, we are not recognized as a innovator. We are only recognized as a support service provider. I think that mentality has to be changed. And we have a government schemes like PLI schemes and all, which are not communicated properly because there is no interest from the pharmaceutical companies to come and start work on the new drugs. I think we need to ensure that that communication reaches to the farmer. Then we also need to look at why in US and FDA is approving focus on orphan drugs completely. They are approving left and right. That means they see the future. They have recognized it in long back, and today they are getting the fruitful about that. But in India also, I think we need to create that system and work on those things. We need to focus on cell and gene therapy, which may still take another 15-20 years to develop a drug. But today, if we start focusing on that, and if the government starts bringing that focus on that, I'm sure we'll able to reach there. Earlier there used to be a lot of gap between world and India. Whenever there is a new technology, even if it's a small camera or a TV, it used to take 15-20 years gap. Today, I think we have seen that just the gap has reduced. I think we should utilize that gap and ensure that there is enough focus on orphan drug, local drug development, including the patient groups and what is needed immediately to solve the problem. And another area is there are many drugs which are off patent now. I think we need to focus on that, bring that focus off patent, and extend this PLI scheme, especially for those who are manufacturing an off patent drug. And also encourage probably a repurposing of the drug. Although I'm not an expert on this, I'm sure the scientists will always talk about these things. I think these are the few initiatives, and finally the focus, attitude, support system, patient registry can definitely stimulate a new way for rare disease. I mean, new hope for the rare disease patients and families in terms of developing a new drug, local therapies, and the lower cost of therapies, which we already seen couple of companies who have started in terms of diets, in terms of Nitisun and the other company, and also we have seen an institution giving an IP to another company for gene therapy. I think these need to be evolved, and there has to be continuous communication between the stakeholder. I think that is where we meaning Dr. Mishra mentioned about one program where we try to bring all the stakeholders on the common platform so that there is a discuss and dialogue takes between all the stakeholders, and effective therapies, what they say, bed to bed therapy. I think that's what we are looking at. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Prasanna, for your inputs on this very important discussion. And I'd like to thank Dr. Madhulika Kabra, Dr. Ashok Gupta, Dr. Ashwin Dalal, and Dr. Rakesh Mishra as well for joining us on this discussion and sharing your thoughts and your views about how to create awareness about the improvements and innovations that we're seeing in technology, and how this entire issue of rare diseases is one that is in people's knowledge in the policymakers, and they are making an effort to ensure that we have effective diagnosis and treatment of rare diseases in our country. So it's a wrap from me. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sameer Kumar Parate, Managing Director, Seva Sanskriti Foundation, who's going to continue this conversation and talk about the implementing of the National Policy on Rare Diseases 2021, and hand it over to Dr. Parate. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Anisha Nair. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, we can hear. Please go ahead.
Hi.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Dr. Sameer. I am a consulting pathologist and a managing director of Seva Sanskriti Foundation. And today I'm here as a moderator in front of you. And today we all stand by for the worthy participation and discussion on the forum of the Rare Disease Summit 2023 organized by ISW Council. And as you're aware about, the discussion which we are on will be the role of voluntary crowdfunding platform. Where are we now, and how do we get the donors involved? And first, I would like to introduce all the panelist worthy members. And firstly, we have Dr. Ratna Puri. Dr. Ratna Duapuri, she's a
Dr. Sameer, you are on mute.
Should I start from the beginning?
No, you can continue.
Okay. So I would like to introduce the panelists, and the dignitaries joining us for the session would be first Ms. Alpana Sharma. She's a co-founder and director, Patient Advocacy Cure SMA Foundation of India. Dr. Priyanshu Mathur, he's an associate professor, Department of Pediatric Medicine, JK Lone Hospital, SMS Medical College, Jaipur, Rajasthan, India. Dr. Sonia Basu, she's a vice president, business, Keto. Dr. Ratna Duapuri, she's a professor in genetics, Gretmar, and chairperson, Institute of Medical Genetics and Genomics, Sir Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi. And Ms. Ankita Kumari, she's a senior vice president, operations, impactguru.com. So let's start the session. I have some of the major questions which is fundamentally including into this. Let me ask, where's the questions? Yes. My first question would be to Dr. Ratna Puri. In your experience, what are some success stories or the inspiring examples where crowdfunding has made a significant difference for rare disease patient or their families?
So I think it's also important to understand how this whole scenario of crowdfunding actually came into place, because 10, 15 years ago, we had never heard of anything with reference to rare disorders that was related to crowdfunding. And I think over the years, Dr. Madhulika, Dr. Ashwin Dalal, and myself have seen that evolving change from a time when there was only clinical diagnosis to confirmation of diagnosis availability, And then the therapies that used to come in the countries outside India, and they were not available to our patients. And then for the last maybe 15 years, we've been treating patients with lysosomal storage disorders, but all this was only on compassionate access programs. And over a period of time, it's when the parent support groups in our country became strong, because I think that was the key change that really happened, because these are not activities of the doctors. The doctors have to do their job of looking after patients. But it is these parent support groups that really became strong. And then they started advocating. And it was the advocacy which started from there, which actually brought in this whole scenario of crowdfunding. And I think all of us have now seen patients who are getting funding for therapies, predominantly for therapies, and I'm only talking in the small landscape of rare disorders, through crowdfunding. We have patients, and why I say SMAs, because that's a very strong parent group after the LSD Support Society and ORDI, and we have Prasanna Shirul also representing that. So you can see the vast change that has happened. And I think it is very fascinating and motivating, and the role of this platform for within the rare disease policy, I think, is something which Dr. Madhulika Kabra, because she has the maximum experience and information related to that, would cover.
Ma'am, how important is it to create the awareness and educate the general public about the rare disease in order to garner the support through crowdfunding? And what strategies have you found effective in the raising its awareness?
So that's what I said. So we've seen this era, multiple eras of changes. And I remember when I was getting into genetics, we used to write letters to referring doctors to get them to understand what genetic disorders is. And over a period of time, as the tests became available, the information and awareness for genetic disorders increased beyond just the super specialty and the multi-speciality hospitals where there were genetic units. And the vast change was really related to the availability of diagnostics through various companies that have come into India, as well as the various genetic centers that are there in major hospitals in the country. And now through the effort of DBT, all the scope and this landscape is increasing. However, so awareness increased there. And then, of course, it's through the parent support groups, as well as crowdfunding brought about awareness in the other way. You know, it was like what we call reverse phenotyping. This was reverse. You have a disorder that has treatment, and then parents do crowdfunding to get treatment for their child. And the society at large comes to know, and they start asking questions that, well, this is a genetic disorder. What are genetic disorders? What are rare disorders? And then it's now become a nice sort of a cycle, I would say, to create awareness.
I think ma'am will take a sip of water. In the meanwhile, we can proceed to Dr. Priyanshu Mathur. Sir, can you tell me, are there any ethical considerations or potential pitfalls associated with the crowdfunding for rare disease patients, and how can we mitigate those risks?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for your question. So there are a few ethical considerations in crowdfunding for rare disease patients. These ethical considerations are: one is fraudulent campaign. Second one is there is loss of privacy for the patient information and family. Then third is there is need to be fairness in how medical crowdfunding funds are distributed between the treating hospitals and consultants. So for first point, the fraudulent campaign. So it is seen that from few countries like China and one from Sweden, there were few companies, crowdfunding companies, they have done the fraudulent campaigns, and they were identified by the regulatory bodies of that countries, and they were debarred or they were penalized. So similarly in India, I think there should be a regulatory body that should have a very good regulatory protocol, and they should monitor the crowdfunding portals in a positive manner. Second point is loss of privacy. So we have a lot of patients in Jaipur. So I belong to Jaipur, and we have one of the largest institution, that is SMS Medical College. And our hospital is JK Lon Hospital. It is the largest pediatric hospital of the country. So we have lots of patients of rare diseases, and we are running our rare disease clinic since 2014. So the problem with few of the families that they don't want to disclose their identity. So like we counseled few of the families that we can put their data on the crowdfunding platform, but they told we don't want to put the name of the patient and photograph of the patient on the crowdfunding portal. So I just want to mention that the state of Rajasthan also developed its own crowdfunding portal. It's first in the any state by running by a government sector by government. Its name is Raj Sambal. So this platform was launched last year. We have included around 42 patients on this crowdfunding portal till today. But few of our patients, they are hesitant to put their details on the crowdfunding portal. So we should have some mechanism for that, so that we will not land up into the trouble because of the privacy issues. And third is the fairness, how the medical crowdfunding, which was funds were accumulated, are distributed. So that is also important. So
yeah, that's great to know that government has also put the crowdfunding portal on their website, and good to know that 42 patients have already registered.
Yes.
One very small question: what factors should potential donors consider when they decide whether to contribute to a crowdfunding campaign for a rare disease patients?
Right. So it's a very important question. So, and it's very difficult to answer this question also, but I think as a donor, if I will consider myself as a donor, so I'll give an example. Like my father, he used to donate a lot of funds to different organizations. And many times I found that he donated to some organization, but that fund was not properly utilized. So for school educations, for the females, school education, my father used to donate a lot of funds. So, but now with crowdfunding portal, we have at least some reliability, because we know how the funds is going to be utilized. So first of foremost point is the reliability. That is very, very important. And we have seen that Impact Guru and Keto, Milap, they have maintained the sanctity. They had used the funds properly. There are few success stories which are available on the open platform. We can go through that. The patients were treated, particularly spinal muscular atrophy patients and some organ transplant patients, and even cancer patients.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much for the wonderful insight. Thank you so much. Thank you. My next question to Dr. Sonia Basu. Hello, ma'am. What advice would you give to someone who wants to initiate a crowdfunding campaign to support rare disease patients? What are the key elements of the strategy that can lead to successful fundraising campaigns?
So I think crowdfunding works in a way where it is very dependent upon how people connect with how donors would connect with the emotional story of that person. It can be a double-edged sword, and unfortunately, that is how it works, when people relate to that person's story. So somebody who's starting a crowdfunding campaign on a platform, I think, and I can give you examples on what works and what doesn't work. I think it's very important to, first of all, be very transparent with the donors on how the funds are planning to get used, because it's a long battle ahead, and the amount that is required also is not small. So if it helps if they're able to break it down into into the number of years that they want the fund for, and with a specific time period, in that specific time period, what that fund would be utilized for. And also telling the story also helps, like, communicating with donors or whoever is, it is out there in the public domain. So of course, where privacy is an important consideration, as was pointed out, where people really don't want to put out the details, but I feel it should be balanced in a way where you don't divulge too much of details which is not required, but at the same time putting out your stories out there, your struggles out there, and what you are needing the money for, because it's not just the drug, but there are so many other things that a patient requires support for, and the money can be used for, especially the crowdfunding donations, where there are no specific limitations, like, some government funds might have, that this can be used for only this particular aspect. I think that's very important to bring it out, that to get that empathy, to create awareness about what the disease is about. So I mean, SMA again is something which people have known over the past few years, I think, especially the way the media has put out that a 16 crore drug or the most expensive drug. So people have at least come to know what SMA is about, but then there are so many other rare disease, enzymatic diseases, problems that people don't know about. So creating more awareness, I think, about the disease, and breaking down your fund use and using a reliable platform, I think all those contribute to your success of the fundraising campaign also. Like, I can give you an example of a child called Kia, and her mother started a crowdfunding platform on all the 3 platforms available: Milap, Keto, Impact Guru, wherever she could find a platform to bring out the child's story. And she created a website for her, and right from the age of, she's put out the story that they're out there, starting from 10 months old when Kia was diagnosed till 12 years of age, what has been the journey like and what are the updates. And so whoever has probably connected with that lady, with a child, and donated once is connected throughout, so it's not like once a person donates and that's the end of it. So she's taken an effort to involve people in her life story. And I think that's a very great example, and that's somehow remained in my mind ever since I interacted with the mother, and the way she has gone about bringing out the story in front of the public and trying to get support for her child and the treatment plans. I think it's remarkable, and that's how people should go about it, where they have to understand that it's a long battle and not just a one-time fundraise, which might not even be sufficient. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. The key point was the transparency. The transparency of fund it's very important, because unless you have the transparency, it is very difficult for an organization and for the person or the patient to be treated, because he would always be in a dilemma for doing that.
True.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. My question would be to Miss Alpana Sharma, ma'am. Ma'am, apart from a financial support, what other types of assistance can be the valuable for the rare disease patient, and how can?
Sorry, you had gone again on mute. The second part of the question I didn't get.
I'll repeat. Apart from the financial support, what other types of assistance or the resources can be valuable for the rare disease patients, and how can the crowdfunding efforts would help in providing these resources?
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a lot for having me on this panel. There has been, so many discussion around the SMA cases, and what Sonia was talking about. Kia's mother, Monisha, happens to be a dear friend and a close yay again. So, taking example of perhaps Kia and many other children's, treatment is just one aspect, and we have spoken so much about the treatment, the prohibited cost of the drug and all these things. But holistic care and management is of utmost important in these cases, especially rare disease cases. SMA is one such case where the treatment is there. There are many rare diseases where there is no treatment. So when I'll talk about, the additional infrastructure support or additional support that the rare disease patient require, it will be focusing on how the quality of life can be improved even for those who don't have treatment. Many of these rare diseases don't have treatment. So what do? Do we leave them to, die. See, I'm also mother of a child suffering from spinal muscular atrophy. My 11-year-old son Arav has SMA, and that's how my journey began almost 10 years back. There was no awareness back then, nothing. And I'm thankful to, I would say Dr. Ratna Puri, Dr. Priyanshu Mathur, many of the Dr. Madhulika ma'am, so many doctors who have come together and helped us to create that kind of platform. And this is what is needed, all the stakeholders on a single platform for rare diseases to come to solution. Now, the additional resources that are required can start from physiotherapy to dietary intervention. In terms of physiotherapy, every day, it's like, these children require to undergo physiotherapy almost every day or at least 3 to 4 years. And the cost of physiotherapy is not covered by any of the scheme. Is scheme called Niramya and many other. But we need to, have some kind of concrete policy in terms of rehabilitation for these children. They require orthotic support. Now, orthotics again cost a lot. The cost is going to depend on the type of material used. They require surgical intervention. In case of SMA, almost every type 1 and type 2 child requires surgery, be it spinal or contracture, one or the other surgery, and none of these costs are covered by insurance or even in the rare disease policy. Reason being, again, genetic diseases are not covered by insurance in our country. So the option left is crowdfunding. There has been, cases. We have official collaboration with Impact Guru, and there has been many successful cases where the fundraising has also happened, and many of our patients are also doing fundraising on Keto and many other platforms. But see, none of these platforms, I'm talking from a patient perspective and being very honest, that none of these platforms have a magic wand where they can, get the money. So we need to have some solid strategy in place. The government needs to intervene. This is crowdfunding is good, but it is not a sustainable solution for all the patients suffering from rare disease. There has been so many incidents. The one time there has been a promise that 50 lakh, one-time grant of 50 lakh can be given to the children, but that has yet to come. The national policy of rare disease, I would say, still require, and it has its implementational challenge. See, we understand that, there are many rare disease and many other challenges, but right to live is a fundamental right for our children, and the kind of support or the infrastructure that these children require, not just the treatment, the entire, the multidisciplinary aspect and care that is required for these children, will need to have a very robust ecosystem or infrastructure for rare diseases in place. We have 11 COEs now our country, but those COEs are also not equipped to handle all the rare disease. That's the sad state. The doctors, the clinicians have been helpful, but at the end of the day, fund is required. And for the fund to be released, we need to have some concrete policy in place where, not just the promises, but it is delivered as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Just a question from my side. As Ms. Sonia Basu ma'am said, that one medicine, that 5 ml vial, the set of 5 ml vial, it costs 16 crores. That 16 crores, it's so difficult to get from the crowdfunding.
It's that's what I'm saying. How many children can you expect, not just this 16 crore drug, and somewhere it has been made. First of all, putting cost on life of a child is not correct. And now there is another drug which is run with SMA. Recently, just yesterday, the DMD medicine from Sarepta has been FDA approved, and it costs 28 crore, 27.2. So it's like, again, the cost, the pharmaceuticals have their own reason for putting the cost, and we need to incentivize.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I just come in there?
Yeah, please, ma'am.
So I have to tell you that a lot of therapies will come in. A lot of therapies will get early FDA approval. But I think it is important for us in India to see what is the status of those therapies before we initiate all these crowdfunding things, because it is a lot of money. A lot of our patients feel that by just giving that therapy, everything is looked after. And I'm sure Alpana here will testify what I say, that therapy does nothing if we don't have the standard of care, multidisciplinary care, and it's lifelong. And 99% of our patients don't understand that. And therefore, I think it's very, very relevant for the crowdfunding platforms, because anybody can just order the therapy. I can order something, say for the heart, and I don't know too much about the heart because that's not my area of expertise. So I think it's very important for the crowdfunding, and because it's a very vital thing, crowdfunding. It has great uses. We do not want it to go into disrepute. And therefore, it's very important to protect it by making sure that the crowdfunding platform links with the appropriate expertise for a specific disorder. And I think that is very relevant. And because of this, it just came. So now for SMA, we know exactly. But even in SMA, there are so many nuances. They want one type of therapy, they want two types of therapy. And it's only the person who's delving into that, who's working with that, understands what the nuances of the therapy is. And supposing we just take this DMD also, we go into the details of the trials to see what really has been the impact of that therapy. Maybe it's FDA approved so that in their country they see the follow-ups. There are many things that go into all these drug therapies. And that's why my plea is that it's very, very important to understand what therapy we should apply for our patients in India, and how important it is that for the specific patient for whom therapy is being asked for, has access and is undergoing the multidisciplinary care that all genetic disorders require, because they are multi-system diseases. I mean, that's just one thought I had. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you for the input, ma'am.
I agree, ma'am. You have been extremely compassionate, supportive. In fact, ma'am is also traveling for the conference, Cure SMA conference to US for all the children. And so has been Dr. Priyanshu, again, the entire JK Lone Hospital, and Dr. Priyanshu Mathur also have been very, very supportive. And that's where, the patient education program is very important. That just thinking that, drug दे दिया और ये जादू की छड़ी है घुमा दिया, कि the miracle drug, the child will start running.
Yeah, ठीक हो जाएगा.
None of them are cured. They are treatment, first of all. But making the patient understand in their language is something as important. And these are lifelong conditions. So, the holistic care is as much part of this as anything else. So that was from my end.
One more question to Ms. Alpna, ma'am. How do we envision the future of crowdfunding for the rare disease patient? Are there emerging trends or innovative approach? Do you find this promising?
Yes, see, we were the first one, I would say, to explore this crowdfunding and have a tie-up with Impact Guru. I see Ankita also here. So we have, hi Ankita, we have collaborated and they have helped a lot. I would say, SMA has been one such case study, you can say, where there has been maximum number of success stories in crowdfunding. But I'm talking from my organizational perspective, where we have 1,100 registered members with us. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The numbers are much more higher. See, the crowdfunding or the private crowdfunding can be successful for at the max 10, 20, 50, not for 1,100 patients. That's a sad reality. This cannot be sustainable solution unless the government intervention comes. See, till the time COVID was there, people had opened their purse and, it happened that SpO2, let's say something as simple as pulse oximeter. For us, it's like lifeline. Nobody knew except for rare disease patient, nobody knew the importance of devices. With COVID, everyone realized the importance of oxygen concentrator. People opened their heart, opened their purses to donate. But now there has been stagnancy. See, till for lifelong, I don't believe that for a lifelong condition, I can be dependent on someone else every time, looking at someone else to pay from their pocket for treatment of my child. We are a tax-paying citizen, and somewhere, once the government comes in, there can be, and there has been, there is a success story in Kerala, which is a case study in itself. A family has raised 48 crores through crowdfunding for Zoln SMA. Now the fund, with the intervention of Kerala government and support, we filed a PIL with Cure SMA India. There are more than 20 children, and just yesterday, Dr. Razina, our co-founder and director for patient advocacy from Kerala, gave us the good news that it has been extended till 7 years. So children from 0 to 7 years are getting RISD plan. So, there can be n number. The idea is to have a solution-oriented mindset, be it crowdfunding, be it, any other mechanism, to have the strategy and all these stakeholders in place. If we have that, it can be done. But we need government intervention. We need, CSR funds to be infused rather than individual crowdfunding. We need CSR funds to be directed for the, sustainable management of not just SMA, all the rare disease patients and families.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the wonderful insight. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Miss Ankita Kumari, can you share some of your personal connection or motivation to support a rare disease patient through crowdfunding? There's some personal experience in this.
I think one of my fondest memories has been with Tira's mother. What we need to understand is that, especially families and patients suffering from rare diseases, there is a sense of isolation that comes with it, right? Because they feel aloof because they are supposed to fight this battle alone. The battle not just to fight the disease, but also to raise so much of funds, right, to get treated. So I think it is very important that especially groups like advocacy groups, like I think Alpana ma'am has been phenomenal in that aspect, where I think we've had more than 300-400 patients come on board, where every one of them, I think the team has been in touch with every one of them, and it is such an emotional journey for them, wherein they are not only just confused about how to go about next, but also how to raise that entire sum of amount to get that child treated. So I think a safe space for patients, right? And I think interacting with most of the patients give us the kind of confidence that we need, because the kind of motivation that they themselves carry, because they want to save their own child, right? And there is no other feeling, there is no other motivation in these parents to really they spend most of their day and the time of the week to only focus towards that. I frankly know so many fathers who've left their jobs, right, to just take care of the child while the mother is working, or the mother has left the job because the father is taking care of the child full time. I think there is some kind of emotional connect that is there with every family, because it is also not just about another 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs to go to get that treatment. It is about even at stages where the family is stuck at 2.5-3 crores, right? They are still trying to figure out where do we get the next 10 crores from, right? And I think it is a journey in itself. Every time we see a family raising 16 crores, it is a celebration for us, right? Because it is a 6 months, 8 months kind of a period where that family takes 8 months, 9 months to really collect that money, right? And there are not just one, but hundreds of activities that the family has to do to really get to that amount. So I think there is a lot of inspiration that is drawn from these parents, and I think, just like Alpana ma'am said, that I think there is a need for the government to come in to help patients. Why? Because not all of them can succeed and raise 16 crores. It's a huge amount. 7 crores for that matter, 16 crores for that matter. It's a huge amount, and people are not insured, right? And how do you really go about it? So I think one of the major sentiment attached to rare disease patients is empathy and the sheer inspiration that we draw from their own struggles and the need to really raise those funds. And I think on the point of the future of crowdfunding, I think I see the future as a collaborative crowdfunding, where multiple rare disease organizations, advocacy group, patient communities, it can be a very powerful way to pool resources and amplify your impact. So I think that, and also
the regulatory and policy support that is needed, right? This can lead to the development of guidelines and incentives and tax benefits that, specifically can address the crowdfunding for rare diseases and encouraging further growth and participation.
Which means that the crowdfunding can make a meaningful impact on the lives of individuals.
Yes.
Right. Could you provide an overview of specific challenges faced by the rare disease patient when it comes to accessing adequate healthcare, treatment, or support?
I think because it is, since most of them, a lot of times the patients are really confused on what to really do. Why? Because you can only administer one type of drug till a specific period of time, right? And then if you're not able to, really administer that drug, the parents start getting a little anxious on what is it that we can do really for, to save the child. So I think coming from there needs to be some kind of clarity in the minds of parents also, that what do we really need to do, and that can the sense that clarity right now amongst the parents is not there. Why? Because they're trying to do so many things at once, right? And that is one of the major issues, and also struggling to really understand that how do we really get to that 16 crores, 10 crores, right? That is one of the major issues that is there, that the enthusiasm with which they start the crowdfunding campaign kind of diminishes in the next 2 to 1 month when they don't see that amount being raised. So I think that is a challenge where you have to keep motivating the parents that if somebody else has done it, right? And for that matter, we've seen parents who have been working in MNCs. We've seen parents who are living in villages raise 16 crores. So it is not that you cannot do it, but the kind of effort that is required is really extensive. And I think families struggle to understand that this is going to be a very long period of time, right? This is not going to happen tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So I think that.
And what difficulties you are facing with the government or the federal people in enrolling the ethical practices or the funding or the transparency which you are maintaining? Do you find some difficulties which are coming up with them?
No, not really. See, because in terms of transparency and accountability, see, clear communication about the purpose of the campaign is expected, and the allocation of the funds is essential, right? And it is also very crucial to provide regular updates to donors and demonstrating the progress that is made and the impact of their contributions. It is important to validate campaigns to maintain the trust and credibility. That is when, pure SMA comes in, right? That every time when we have an SMA campaign, we make sure that we let Alpana and her entire team, Alpana ma'am and her entire team, know that, okay, this is a case that has come in. Can you please verify that, are the documents correct? Is the line of treatment that the patient is saying is correct, right? So I think ensuring that and ensuring that the funds raised are genuinely going towards supporting the parents. Responsible spending also is one of the criteria, right? That the organization of the crowdfunding campaigns have a responsibility to utilize the funds in a responsible and ethical manner, establishing clear financial management protocols and oversight mechanisms to ensure that the funds are used effectively and in line with the campaign's stated objectives. Also collaboration with experts and institutions, partnering with reputed organizations like Cure SMA and healthcare institutions add credibility to those crowdfunding campaigns. And I think there is an ethical consideration in the treatment options also. Like, we should be cautious when you're promoting or funding alternative or experimental treatments, right? It is important to consider the ethical implications and potential risks. So engaging medical professionals and adhering to established ethical guidelines and help navigate through these complexities. And also prioritizing that the personal information of patients and donors are safeguarded, right? And if we look at the long term sustainability, then I think rare disease patients often require ongoing support, which goes beyond the immediate funding need of a single campaign, right? So the long-term sustainability needs to be considered, and effort should be made to, explore more avenues of continuous funding, and establishing partnerships to seek grants or engaging in advocacy for even increased research funding, right? So I think these are the points that we keep in mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In case a patient is diagnosed, how come? What is the first step he'll come to? He'll come to a doctor or for
He'll
raising a
come,
fund, because he'll
yes.
come because
No,
once a
he'll
doctor
come.
diagnoses, what is the next step with like Impact Guru, SMA, or Keto will do?
So the first step is that the patient goes to a doctor to really understand what's happening. Once the doctor says that, okay, that this is what you're suffering from, right? And there is an estimate that is provided by the hospital, right? With that estimate, the patient comes to the crowdfunding platform, right? And that is when we try and gather as much details as possible about the patient, and we verify the estimate with the hospital. Once the patient and the campaigner KYC is collected and the estimate is approved and by the hospital administrator, is when we approve such campaigns. So it is important to ensure that you are not only checking the documents of the patient, but also the campaigner who is trying to raise funds, and also at the same time verifying the documents that have been submitted, medical documents that have been. So, and we have a different trust and safety team that does that specifically for all the campaigns that are created on the platform.
Thank you, Ankita ji. Dr. Ratna ma'am, I would like to understand the very strategies. Only the specific question: what strategies have you found effective in the raising awareness?
Okay. So the strategies are now very different from what they were previously. So there are two types of strategies. One is a face-to-face. So you do meetings and you have face-to-face interaction with doctors of other specialities, and especially the primary care specialities, pediatricians, obstetricians, neonatologists, okay, neurologists, so that you make them aware of the rare disorders. I mean, even now I see patients, with as simple a disorder, which we can do a lot for, as Down syndrome, where an 8-month-old child was just left neglected because the doctor said this child has intellectual disability and there is nothing that you can do, and the only reason they actually come to a unit in a higher end center is because the mother is pregnant again. So in the smaller cities, so in the larger cities, there's a lot that is happening. I feel it is in the second tier, the third tier cities, at the level of the district hospitals, that we need to create awareness, because awareness is very, very limited there. We like to do it through teleconsults. We do a lot of webinars, but we are not very sure as to who comes for those webinars. So I personally believe that the time for the other doctors to come to a central place has gone. It is now time for the doctors who are involved with rare diseases to go to the peripheral centers and to create awareness, because there is no other way that it can happen. And secondly, in medical colleges, because the students there are going to be the doctors of tomorrow, and in an effort to prepare them and enhance their awareness, we should start, moving to different medical colleges in different parts of the country. I think these are two main strategies that are there in my personal experience.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. It's my immense pleasure to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the dignitaries. You have participated in discussion on the role of voluntary platform, and your valuable views and insight have added a new dimension to understanding how to do a crowdfunding. I would also like to thank you, the audiences, for the active participation and engagement discussion. Your knowledge has dwelled us deeper and explored the new avenues for using the crowdfund to create positive feedback. Once again, thank you all the dignitaries, the organizers, audience members, and thank you for this voluntary crowdfunding platform. It's been an honor to be a part of this event. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks a lot,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll hand over to Mr. Reddy. Hello, Ms. Neerja Reddy.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Samir, the next
Yes.
session would start from 2 p.m.
Okay,
So
okay.
until there's a short break into the session. So if you can just announce that and ask the audience to come back at 2.
Should I tell them to come back?
Yes, sir. So same link. We would start the next session from 2 p.m.
Okay, I'll write in the message box.
Sure, sir. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Neerja Reddy Maleda. I am the VP for Genetic Counseling at Map My Genome, and it's a great pleasure to be here with some of the esteemed speakers we have today. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. We're going to talk about neurofibromatosis, knowing the disease, prevalence, screening, access to treatment, and the way forward. And today I have a great opportunity to discuss some of the ideas and experiences of very eminent doctors and speakers today here with me. It's a pleasure to introduce the speakers, Dr. Shefali Gulati. She's the Child Neurology Division Chief, Department of Pediatrics at AIIMS, New Delhi. Dr. Shefali, welcome. I have Dr. Inusha.
Thank you.
Who is a professor and unit head at the Genetic Metabolic Unit at the Department of Pediatrics at Pegmer, Chandigarh. Dr. Inusha, ma'am, welcome. And we also have Dr. Lokesh Lingappa here, who is a consultant child and adolescent neurologist at Rainbow Hospital Children, Hyderabad. Dr. Lokesh, please welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
And we also will be joining with us today other speakers, Dr. Ashok Pillai, Professor of Neurology and Neuroscience at Amrita Institute of Medical Science, Kochi. Along with us will also be Dr. Manish Modi, who is the Professor in Department of Neurology, Pegmer, Chandigarh. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking out the time. And I would like to ask you some questions today around neurofibromatosis. Hopefully, this gives us some more ideas and sheds more light on how to go forward to advocate better and to provide better support for families with neurofibromatosis. Dr. Shefali, I'd like to start with you first. If you could help us understand a little bit of basics information about neurofibromatosis and what is the difference between NF1 and NF2?
Thank you, Neerja. Neurofibromatosis is one of the phacomatoses, notable for their dysplastic nature and tendency to form tumors in various organs, particularly the nervous system. We actually have three distinct kinds. We are talking about two, but there are three. Neurofibromatosis type 1, neurofibromatosis type 2, and schwannomatosis. The most common is NF1, which accounts for 96% of the cases, and NF2 accounts for 3% of the total cases. And the schwannomatosis has overlapping features with NF2 and is pretty rare. Coming to NF1, it is an autosomal disorder with an incidence of approximately 1 in 2,600 to 1 in 3,000 individuals. This is international data. We do not have any specific data from any Indian studies which I could come across. And it shows extreme phenotypic heterogeneity because there is incomplete penetrance. It is characterized by multi-system tumors, particularly neurofibromas. Other manifestations would be abnormal skin pigmentation, Irish nodules, skeletal problems like long bone dysplasia, sphenoid wing dysplasia, pseudoarthrosis, cardiovascular complications including hypertension, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and learning difficulties and behavior issues in them, even in many of the children. And the clinical manifestations actually evolve over a period of time. And overall, the life expectancy is reduced by 8 to 21 years. In one study, I had found that if you see sporadic NF1 cases met the NIH diagnostic criteria 50% by 1 year of age and 97% by 8 years. So that is something important to understand, that the manifestations are evolving. So from birth to 2 years, you will have the capillary spots, pseudoarthrosis, sphenoid wing dysplasias, optic nerve gliomas, plexiform neurofibromas rarely. 2 to 6 years, you will have axillary freckling, Lish nodules coming up, optic nerve granulomas, other CNS tumors, learning disabilities, speech delay, and plexiform neurofibromatosis. Between 6 to 10 years, you start having, besides learning disability, attention deficit hyperactivity. There may be scoliosis, there may be plexiform neurofibromas, and there may be some increased, other cancer types like rhabdomyosarcomas and headache. During adolescence, you'll again have more of cutaneous and subcutaneous neurofibromas and malignant transformations of plexiform neurofibromas, and also the nerve sheath tumors which come up in hypertension. And then that is how it evolves. But if you come up to the NF2 is an autosomal dominant disorder with an incidence of about 1 in 33,000 to 1 in 40,000. It's rarer, and its prevalence overall is 1 in 100,000. And it is typically diagnosed between 20 to 30 years of age. Only about 10% may present before 10 years of age and 18% present before 15 years. And it has a almost complete penetrance by age of 60 years. And the time to diagnosis and all is pretty variable in that. And you have basically the tumors, ocular manifestations, and skin lesions. And 90 to 95% of them will have bilateral vestibular schwannomas. And you may have intracranial meningiomas in 45 to 77%, spinal tumors in 63 to 90%, peripheral neuropathy in 63%. And the ocular manifestations include cataracts in 60 to 80%, epiretinal membranes in 12 to 40%, retinal hematomas in 6 to 22%, and other skin lesions like cutaneous tumors, skin plaques, and subcutaneous tumors. Coming to, if you see, the NF2 in pediatric age group is often unrecognized, and in one study of 368 individuals, 42% had onset between 1 to 19 years. And vestibular schwannomas accounted only for 15 to 30% of the pediatric age group presentations. And they more had problems with visual complaints and spinal cord compression. So that is one thing to be kept in mind. And if you decide to compare and see the if you try to see what is the difference between the NF1 and NF2. So basically, firstly, the chromosome abnormalities on 17q in NF1 and NF2 is 22q. And in the age of diagnosis, in mostly in childhood in NF1 and mostly the third decade in NF2, the clinical findings, which I mentioned, were capillary spores, leash nodules, neurofibromas, and axillary and inguinal freckling in NF1. In NF2, you have come with hearing loss, vertigo, multiple cranial neuropathies, cataracts, scoliosis, paraplegia, and rarely neurofibromas. And specific imaging findings which will maybe there in NF1 are focal areas of signal intensity in white matter and deep brain matter, and plexiform neurofibromas and optic nerve gliomas, whereas you have the vestibular schwannomas predominantly in the NF2. So they are a bit different between NF1 and NF2.
Thank you, ma'am, for a very detailed description of the findings both in NF1 and NF2. To follow up on that, ma'am, so if you were to, give certain red flags to, let's say, a very general pediatrician who's present, in the second tier, third tier community, then what would be the top 5 that you would provide to either a parent or a doctor who's a general physician who is seeing a child?
So generally for the pediatricians and all, obviously the most importantly, what we'll be seeing are the pigmentary lesions which are coming up for these children. So you have to keep in mind, and once you have any of these skin lesions coming up, so you look for the other associated findings, and you would like to do the CNS examinations as well. And in some of them, you may just come up with the neurofibromas which may be there. So basically that is, and in cases of any other, if somebody is, having all of these, any of the basically what is its child going to present is going to be mostly what will be evident would be the skin manifestations or the neurofibromas in the NF1. In that, it's just that holistically the pediatrician should examine and see for other associated things and keep under surveillance. That is something very important. For the NF2, which will be, as I mentioned, they have some visual problems and spine problems more so seen, less than the hearing deficits in the pediatric age group. So basically for both of them, importance is for, keeping on surveillance, first a multidisciplinary holistic evaluation, and then keeping on the surveillance for these patients.
Right. Thank you so much. Is the prevalence different in India? Do we have any data on the actual prevalence in the Indian community?
No, I did mention that we do not have data specifically for Indian population. But we have no reason to believe why it should be different. We don't have this.
Sure.
We don't have the registries and all as of now.
Correct, which is one of the areas that we definitely have to go forward and work in.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, there are specific guidelines for management for NF1 and NF2, and I know that there are specific guidelines in the United States, in Europe. Is the management similar in India, and do we have any different guidelines here?
We don't have any specific guidelines in India. But yes, we have definite guidelines in the West, and we follow that only. And the latest is a European Reference Network on Genetic Tumor Risk Syndromes of January 2023, which we have. So basically, there are no specific guidelines basically for India. So basically, what happens is when you see a child, you have to do a multidisciplinary evaluation and then follow up for the routine surveillance for all the systemic things. And for the pediatrics, you like to do basically what the American Academy your pediatrics as ACMCG guidelines are that all forms of, annually you should have a pediatric surveillance for all forms of neurofibromas, neurological evaluations, and then you may need an MRI if somebody's had a seizure or any focal deficit. Hypertension, if you're having, then look for pheochromocytoma or renal artery stenosis, and anthropometry, maybe because you may have a progressive head size enlargement,
Right.
skeletal changes to be followed up, evaluation of the eye, and maybe, if some suspicion is there, then you need to do an MRI for the optic nerve gliomas, and precocious puberty has to be looked for, and developmental, behavioral, and scholastic problems have to be looked on. For the adults, then later on for malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, annual surveillance is required, and for breast cancer, mammography every 30 years, and hypertension, again, the pheochromocytoma and renal artery stenosis, and for pheochromocytoma screening, that is there from 30 years onwards, and otherwise, osteoporosis and scoliosis, neurocognitive and psychiatric manifestations, reproductive issues, and high-risk obstetric care because of vascular and hypertensive, complications and chronic pain. All of them, are important to be seen and followed up. So these patients basically need to be, surveillance is important once you suspect in these patients. It becomes a very important thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for a very detailed, information on how to manage, and definitely it's a multisystemic disorder. Now, I would like to ask Dr. Inusha some of the questions around genetics of NF1. Like Dr. Shefali has already mentioned that it's an autosomal dominant disorder. Can you please, ma'am, shed some more light on what type of genetic testing would you recommend for children or individuals suspected for having NF? Dr. Inusha, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I am here. So I was saying since it is autosomal dominant disorder, so many autosomal dominant disorders have a variable expressivity. And in this, most of the patients may be sporadic with a mutation, single nucleotide variant in the gene, that is NF1 gene. And sometimes it can be familial. And in that case, one of the parent will be carrier for the mutation or will be affected. So when one parent is affected person for NF1, then it is easy to diagnose the child because all the manifestations, as mentioned by Dr. Shefali, will not manifest in the first 1 to 2 years of age. So full manifestations may come after the first decade. So in some cases, it may be difficult to diagnose. And if there is any doubt, one has to go for the genetic testing. Otherwise, many patients can be diagnosed by the diagnostic criteria given by Legge et al. And if we are doing a genetic testing, then there are different types of genetic tests which can be done. So most of the time, one can detect maximum number of variants, that is the single nucleotide variants, by a next generation sequencing. And nowadays, because NGS platforms are available in private labs and sometimes in the government setup, one can go for the NGS testing and do the testing to identify the variant in the NF1 gene. And in over 90% of the cases, this variant can be identified on this test. Then, most of the time one can diagnose by doing this test, but the initial approach is through the diagnostic criteria, clinical diagnostic criteria that has been provided. And if the parent is already affected and has a mutation report, then one can do just testing in the child by Sanger sequencing to identify that variant to confirm the diagnosis.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. So to follow up on 2 questions on that, what percentage of individuals have a new mutation or a de novo mutation compared to the percentage of families that may have an affected parent, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed?
So up to 20%, you may get a familial NF1, though we don't have Indian data available as such. But we in the OPD we see familial cases, and almost maybe 1/4 maybe familial. But actually we don't see the adults; we see mostly children. So exact we have to see later what is the exact epidemiology in the Indian subcontinent.
Absolutely.
And so in sporadic cases, you need to do the testing in the child who has scaphola macules or who has leash nodules in the eye, or sometimes the child may present with hemangioblastic, the other manifestation, that some tumor like malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, or optic nerve glioma. So in that case, one has to do the testing, genetic testing, and confirm the diagnosis.
Right. And for cases where, 90% of cases, like you said, the initial testing by an genome sequencing or by a gene sequencing, we are able to identify a mutation for the NF1 or NF2. What about the 10%? Would you follow them up with a different type of test, and what would that be?
So actually, sometimes you can get a deletion in this NF1 gene. So it can also be the 17q11 chromosome region deletion, 17q11 chromosome region deletion can be there, which includes the NF1 gene in that region. And so if that deletion is the copy number variant, and this copy number variant can be identified by the separate test, that is the chromosomal microarray. And though the recently many labs claim that they can also detect copy number variants even on the NGS analysis. So as expert analysis on the NGS data is needed if you want to do a copy number variant test analysis on the data. And nowadays we are increasingly getting copy number variants even on the NGS. But if NGS is negative, the alternative test is the chromosomal microarray, which can detect the deletion, NF1 deletion, or the 17q11 deletion. So that will also provide a confirmatory diagnosis to the family. So the other problem is that in some cases, the features, when they are not fully present, and in a younger child, only if cafe macules or CAMs are present, and you are not sure whether which type of exactly disorder the child is having. So because there are other conditions, you can also get cafe macules. So in that case, one can again keep alternative diagnosis, and one can also get a spread one mutation on the testing, and this can also be tested by the NGS, and this accounts for 1 to around 3% of the patients supposedly thought as NF1, but may not be exactly NF1. They just have cafe macules and axillary or inguinal freckling, but other manifestations of NF1 like leash nodules and other manifestations, they are not there in the patient. So spread one mutations cause Ligius syndrome. So because the prognosis may vary in these two conditions, and usually the lifespan in these patients is reduced by 15 to 25 years in the NF1 patients, more reduced in the women with adults with NF1, and less in the men with NF1. So there are several complications which most of these Dr. Shefali has already discussed. So malignant one, I will just tell about the malignant transformation of some of the tumors, and if this malignant transformation occurs, or there are large plexiform neurofibromas, they may be debilitating and may require alternative form of therapy, or they may require operative intervention. And in these cases nowadays, a new drug has been approved, that is selumetinib, and this can be given in children above 2 years of age with plexiform neurofibromas, which are interfering with the activities or the mobility of the child. And though this drug is quite expensive, and so the pros and cons should be checked, and accordingly this option should be given if there is a form of reimbursement or some other alternative form of therapy that they can arrange finances. And nowadays we have the rare disease policy, so sometimes we can get this drug. That is one option, though at present I don't think anyone would have got this drug through the rare disease policy, but there is a chance that if some of the patients of NF1 need this therapy, they can be given this therapy through government support through the rare disease policy.
Thank you, ma'am, for that information on the treatment bit. So what is your recommendation for, let's say a family that's coming into your clinic and, they want to plan for another child and their first child has been diagnosed with NF. So what would you recommend them in terms of testing and follow-up steps?
So main is the monitoring of the child, the child who has an F1, you have to do opthal evaluation, MRI spine, and sometimes cardiac evaluation may be needed. And so all the systemic evaluation we do to identify the additional manifestations. If there is the optic pathway glioma, then accordingly they have to follow up, and usual follow-ups that are recommended are usually 1 yearly in the younger child up to 10 years of age. Later the follow-ups may be less frequent, 2 to 3 yearly. So the evaluation should be done again in the follow-ups, and if there is a suspicion of any malignant transformation of the any neurofibroma, like suppose there is pain, persistent pain, or there is a change of color, or there is rapid increase in the size of the tumor, that will require immediate attention. And so if there is a malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, it has to be removed. And then the other thing is regarding the prevention. So prevention is once you have the confirmation of the diagnosis, and if the disease has been identified to be severe enough or debilitating in additional family member, that may indicate option of prenatal diagnosis should be given in that family. And otherwise, since there is a variable expressivity, and if it is already running in families for 5 to 6 generations, and there is no major problem encountered by the other family members having the disease, then prenatal diagnosis may not be warranted in that family. So all the options should be discussed with the family. So nowadays what we do in the patients who are insistent on doing a prenatal diagnosis in case of autosomal dominant disorder, we give them an option of IVF, in which they can take a ovum donor or a sperm donor, and they can have a child, and that child will more likely be free from the disease. But one should remember that the disease NF1, though it is said that it will be 1 in 3,000, so it is, but it is thought that it is underdiagnosed, and actually the incidence may be 1 in 2,000 or so, because we don't test everyone, and some may have minor manifestations and may not be diagnosed throughout their life. So so accordingly, all the facts should be told to the family, and accordingly they can decide what to do next, whether to do a genetic testing, whether to do a prenatal diagnosis, or whether to go for IVF. So the final decision is with the family or the couple. In Indian scenario, usually the family decides. The couple, the only couple which we have in the OPD, or who presents with the child in the OPD, they don't decide. Sometimes the elder members, other elder members in the family decide. And so sometimes repeat genetic counseling may be required, so that we know their decisions, and accordingly the further planning can be done for prevention in the family.
Sure. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for your insights on the genetics and the follow-up tests and the diagnosis, genetic diagnosis of NF1. Dr. Manish Modi, I would like to now ask you some questions for adults. We've talked about children and management for children and the genetics. Can you shed some light? Because it is a multisystemic disorder, and it does require a multidisciplinary approach. What are the most important screenings that you offer for males with NF1 and for females with NF1 and adults?
Thank you, ma'am. As we have already listened, the problem is of tumors everywhere in the body, right? So as an adult neurologist, what we commonly encounter is either the growth of these tumors, appearance of new tumors, and say most of the complications of precocious puberty or growth retardation, they are dealt with pediatricians, and looking at the adult population, how do they suffer from NF1 and NF2, then how we approach is that on regular follow-up, we always ask the patient if there is some new symptoms which are coming up in the particular territory of a particular nerve. A patient has neurofibroma or plexiform neurofibroma, then we ask them whether there is any increase in the symptoms, any numbness, any pain, or any change in the firmness of the tumor, or any certain increase in size of the tumor or change in the skin over the tumor. So these are the certain things which you want to ensure every time the patient comes to you and comes for an examination. And most importantly, they are warned for new symptoms. They tend to adapt because these are slow-growing tumors, as we all know. So, like the other day, just the day before, a young female in 20s, she just came with, I'm having some abnormal sensation in my hand. She was, earlier diagnosed with an F2. And once we examined, there was a clear case of myelopathy. We did an imaging and there was a large extradural tumor right over there. So, meaning thereby that these patients actually need the awareness about that awareness needs to be there that any symptom, any kind of numbness, any kind of pain, any kind of walking difficulty, any kind of new symptom or a band-like sensation, anything of that kind, they have to be made aware so that we can timely diagnose them and timely treat them, rather than that they become paraplegic or they have bladder disturbance and a poor outcome. So that is what I feel is the basic idea of following these patients who have already been diagnosed during their childhood with either NF1 or NF2. That is the most important thing, especially this is for both males as well as females. And another important thing which I felt and which should be done was a thorough examination that starts from head to toe, that every time a patient visits you, at least you have an idea of whether the lesions are of the same size or they are increasing. Then you do ask them about any visual problems, any visual disturbances, any blurring of vision. Most of them are apprised of. Of course, we don't commonly see in this age, but they should be apprised of, especially in NF2, where you may have other tumors, optic nerve glammas, those seen in younger age, but they can have other optic nerve sheath meningiomas. So any vision loss, any cranial nerve involvement, any new onset seizures, or any increase in size of seizures, or any weakness post seizures, that should be taken seriously. So rather, the pediatricians, they are always worried about increase in size or macrocephaly, which commonly is not a problem in adults. These patients do have migraine or primary headaches, but then you cannot ignore a headache which is continuous and is associated with vomitings and blurring of vision, meaning thereby that there are red flags in headaches. These patients, once you investigate, they may not have tumor, but on follow-up, you cannot rule out that they won't be suffering from tumor. So or increase in size of tumor. So the warning signs regarding raised ICP, the warning signs of blurring of vision, the warning signs of numbness, pain, paresthesias, walking difficulty, they have to be told to the patient, and we as neurologists have to examine them for these subtle signs and symptoms, and should be noted. And then another important thing which already had been mentioned by NAM, Dr. Shefali, that hypertension is a common issue, is an issue, and you can have complications in adults in the form of IC bleeds or hypertensive encephalopathy. So the BP should be checked, and these patients should be told about that. If you have any features of, say, palpitations or sudden sweating, then that raises a suspicion towards, as already been discussed, of pheochromocytoma or accelerated hypertension because of that. And it has to be investigated by both biochemical methods as well as by imaging, at least a simple Doppler of the renal arteries or non-invasively MR angiography. And if suspicion is still high, you may still go ahead with CT angio of the renal arteries to prove or disprove their diagnosis, because that may not damage kidneys, but the consequent bad effects of hypertension at such a young age can be catastrophic. and we see it. So that is another thing which I feel that as a neurologist, we have to apprise the patient, not only patient, but also, at times you have to discuss with their family physicians also, because they cannot come every day for these symptoms. And whenever they are treating them, and if they are finding some red flags, then they should be referred for further investigations to an institute which is equipped with all the modalities and can investigate for a particular symptom. So the other important aspect, as you told, that what should be done, especially in females. So females, two important issues. One is the breast cancers, which already was discussed, and that should be. So mammography, the screening, though it's not a very, though there are guidelines for annual screening after a particular age, but especially in neurofibromas, because the incidence of breast cancers is high, the screening starts in an early age. So the patient should also be told about the warning signs or abnormal lumps in the breast, how to do the self-palpation. The guidelines as already are there by the breast physicians and breast surgeons, but they have to be apprised of any growth, any abnormal swelling, any abnormal discharge, any abnormal nipple discharge. All these should be apprised to the patient, and as per the guidelines, I think every year, starting from as young as 28 or 30 years, that these patients should undergo the screening for breast cancer. And if there is any suspicious lesion on mammography, I think they should be proactively managed with surgery and other drugs. So specifically in females, and then in females, the specific again issue is that of pregnancy and the complication, the problem of delivery or cesarean or eclampsia or accelerated hypertension. So again, if they have not been worked up for pheochromocytoma or renal artery stenosis, probably if the pregnant female is hypertensive, then these two things I think should be actively or aggressively monitored and treated accordingly. And again, the patient should be told about these problems, and then probably they may have more problems with the anesthesia, for that matter, even spinal anesthesia also. So a thorough examination whether this patient needs any screening for any kind of tumor in the spine. Of course, we will not do MRI in every patient, but if you are getting some signs and symptoms of some tumors, because they also tend to grow during pregnancy, then it should be proactively done, because these patients may undergo lumbar puncture and they may cause sudden worsening. So I mean to say that these are the specific challenges which a female patient usually faces at a younger age because of her predisposition to tumors and accelerated hypertension. So these are, it's a couple of issues which in a young adult or in a young female, we have to make them understand. And of course, that important point remains the case of genetic counseling that has already been discussed, but this is the age now where they have to plan further. It being an autosomal dominant disease with high penetrance, I think genetic counseling should be done. They should be advised that their kids may suffer and they have to take the decision accordingly. And if they have taken, then they should be counseled by a geneticist that what is the chances and how we can do the chorionic playing, or we can diagnose them at the right time so that their offspring should not suffer from the same disease which they are suffering from, because ultimately it definitely adds to the morbidity and mortality in a big way. That is how I feel as a neurologist or as a physician, you are encountering a patient with NF1 or NF2. That is how I think I will go ahead in screening or in surveillance.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving some information on handling adult patients. A follow-up question on that, is there a role or what is the role of a whole body MRI, given that, and this is just curiosity that I have, because I have definitely read about, especially in conditions like leishmaniasis, there has been some studies on the advantages of a whole body MRI, and this was mostly US based. I'm not sure how it's placed in India, and what's
but
your
it
opinion
is,
on it?
I agree with you. It's an important question, but first of all, the awareness about the disease and
yes,
how it can affect the neuroaxis. The patient may be asymptomatic for a tumor, which may be lingering or which may be malignant transformation. So given a choice or given an opportunity or given facilities, if they are there, then probably in an adult population where you are dealing with an F1, or for that matter, even an F2, whole body screening data, which is not something which is impossible with all the latest modalities, including the susceptibility weighted or diffusion imaging. I think if facility is there, I think it should be offered, because it gives you, or it gives the treating physician or the treating neurosurgeon an idea about the disease burden, and to be more proactive about any new sign which is coming in, and you already have a data, you are not willing to operate a particular schwannoma or a neurofibroma at a particular time, but maybe if you have a baseline idea, then probably you can focus on that particular, that this is of this big size, and baseline you have got 8 or 10 neurofibromas or schwannomas already lingering in the spine, then probably you become more cautious rather than blindly hitting one day and then you find, oh, there are already 20 lesions over there, which one to operate, which one is contributing. So if you have a baseline data, probably there can be no guideline, especially in our setup. But if you ask me personally, probably it becomes an important, screening tool for a neurologist, and more importantly for a neurosurgeon to follow these patients. If not annually, maybe later on, if patient develops some symptom, then probably he can be proactively taken. As I saw, one of my patients of NF1 is on my follow-up for last 15 years. He got operated at the age of 8 and at the same junction, and the surgeon couldn't take out the whole of it. Now he had multiple tumors, but now again he comes with a new symptom, and now you do an MRI of the same region and you found that the tumor has grown too big. So you had baseline data and you now follow up with another MRI. Then you are very comfortable that this is how it was surgically removed, and this is what the situation now, and probably this patient needs another surgery. He's got it and he's much better. With so many other tumors already there, so the surgeon has not touched those. But this is how, I mean to say, your question, very difficult, but that's the answer, right?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. I think it's an important discussion. I do see Dr. Inusha and Dr. Ashok Pillai has also shared some of their thoughts on the chat box. And I do agree, I think, especially with children with macrocephalic AMS, MRI, yes, definitely is something that can help in diagnosis. Now, to follow up another question, since it's such a multidisciplinary approach, what is the role of a specialty clinic for NF? And do you see that in India?
So many diseases need so many specialty clinics. Of course, it needs a lot of interaction between the ophthalmologist, the geneticist, the neurosurgeon, neurologist. Of course, the role of neurologist is much lower. The endocrinologist and the orthopedician. So it's a good idea, especially if we are in a tertiary care center. And see what happens. You can't have dedicated clinics. That is what I feel, because there are so many diseases which need dedicated clinics. But then, depending upon, as we have in our institute and in most of the institutes, some people, they have their specific inclination for particular diseases. I'm just talking now practically. If you ask me, there should be, the answer is a big yes. But if you see, then probably some like-minded people or people who have special interest in a particular disease, they usually form a group. see a surgeon with me, a neurosurgeon. We have two surgeons with us, and we have ophthalmologists with us. We have genetic people with us. So, I mean to say, for counseling and all those things. So probably it becomes a group which, you know, examines, maybe it's a skin specialist with a pediatrician, with a neurosurgeon, with a neurologist, and with an orthopedician. And, you know, anything anybody encounters, he refers to a particular person and, you know, give a very specialized and a dedicated, you know. That is probably, you know, probably we have such kind of setups in most of the, I won't say tertiary care, but in most of the multi-speciality hospitals and groups, where, you know, we can have some updates on what is happening, what are the newer therapies, what are the newer surgical techniques, and how we can manage particular patient. That is how, you know, we can improve the early diagnosis and early management. And to have a dedicated neurofibromatosis clinic definitely will improve the outcome or improve the overall scenario in a given patient. But to have it will remain a challenge. That is what I feel. But we definitely should have subspecialties coming together and having a group so that the patient don't have to, you know, go from one person to other over days to weeks, and the things can be sorted out within a day. That is how I feel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Dr. Modi. To follow up on these questions, Dr. Ashok Pillai, I think I'd like to invite you to answer some questions around, surgical treatments. Now, Dr. Modi has talked a lot about the tumors that some of these people present with, and difficult tumors that require follow-up. So, what's your experience? And I know you've done a lot of work around surgery and research. And so, who are these people who require the surgery, and what types of tumors especially are the most important where you see surgical treatments as the only option?
Okay, well, thank you for, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Thanks. So thank you for the opportunity to share our experience. I wasn't sure what the form would be, so I have a few old talks. Shall I use some of those slides and whatnot to make the point?
Yes.
And roughly how much time should I use? Should I plan for?
I think we have about another 25 minutes, so if you can take 10 minutes, okay. And then
so I think in some of the in my sharing of about 15-year experience with NF clinics plus cases, probably a lot of it might get answered. So I think I'll start with that. But at the outset, though I am a neurosurgeon, dealing with these patients for so long, I like to think that I'm not a surgeon because most of the time I try not to operate. So this is a talk which was we had delivered in Asian Society of Neuro-Oncology back around 2015 for the same purpose. And recently we had, I'm just sharing, I think you're not seeing my screen. I haven't shared.
I don't think I can see your screen, yes. Can somebody help him with the access to share screen, please?
It's fine. You should have it now, I think. Right?
Yeah, so if we can take 10 minutes to go through the slides, because I have some other questions also for you.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's going slow. Yeah, so recently we had, in 2017, we had this international conference on neurofibromatosis and rasopathies here in Kochi, which was kind of dedicated to a lot of it was a meeting of minds of people who've been running NF clinics to kind of put together our thoughts. As the previous speakers and as you have rightly indicated, these guidelines are evolving, exist and are evolving. But to make a long story short, one of the most difficult things in putting together guidelines, especially in neurofibromatosis, which my past 15 years and our research studies on genotype-phenotype correlations have taught me, is that we tend to look at this at we like to do something quickly and make guidelines, but you're looking at a genetic trait, not really a disease. You're looking at a genetic trait that manifests itself over the patient's lifespan. So when we look, like we did a genotype-phenotype correlation study funded by the ICMR between 2012 and 2015. For want of time, I won't go over that in detail, but basically what we were trying to do, we were doing genotyping. So we were doing mainly looking at deletions, microdeletion syndromes, and our MLPA, plus looking at some sequencing here and there based on a phenotype-based approach, and we were trying to do cluster analysis and see if at least one or two, we can differentiate one or two pathways that the NF process happens in an individual's life. My main hypothesis was like, okay, optic glioma presents itself in the first 6 years of life. So that is probably a genetic event that you should be able to do a binary thing, yes or no, and then see if we can go back and find the trait. And the lab which I had been running, so I haven't been, as a disclaimer, I kind of stopped my lab research in NF about 6 years ago. It was mainly between 2010 and 2016. But what we were trying to look at, find perhaps some mutation lead, which would help us look into downstream things, which might eventually help therapeutics. And actually in NF2 and VHL, we were able to do that. But the main point I want to make is, well, the main limitation we came across is that you cannot approach the neurofibromatosis looking at it like at one moment. So the conclusion for that, and to share my experience, is that the best thing is to run a clinic and then follow the patients longitudinally. And so the main points which I go into in my talk, and to make, so this is probably the most important thing. What are the main features which lead to morbidity and reduced life expectancies? How can we identify these and manage them with least morbidity and mortality, and focus only on those? So there's an immediate tendency, because in NF1 in particular is like such a myriad of manifestations. So you can really get disoriented, and then there's also a huge sense of panic from both the patient and the clinicians. So you have somebody who has a genetic syndrome, it has a few manifestations, and they've been around to see so many different clinicians, and there's no single NF1 or NF2 person. So this is the most common syndrome you see. Nobody knows themselves or the patients or any single clinician what to do. But if we just slow down and shift gears, rather than trying to race through, you just have to plan for the long haul. To summarize many years of experience, the most important thing being that apart from MPNSTs in NF1 and rare occurrences of other malignancies, they are well known to occur, but they're very uncommon. As you all know, and as was discussed by the previous speakers, the incidence of NF1 is 1 in 4,000. So honestly speaking, that's hardly a rare disease. It's quite common. It's a trait. Yeah. And in the large number of patients, these are not common. In my 15 years of NF practice, I haven't seen that many, apart from MPNST. Now, MPNST, I'll go into that regarding surgery. But one of the most important things in running an NF clinic is to establish a confidence with the patient that we can manage this. You're actually not a patient. The vast majority of people with NF1 come to us with a trait which is picked up from cutaneous manifestations. So one of the first things I do is I sit them in and have a long discussion that you are the same person you were the rest of your life. Nothing new has happened. That gene is there with you. And this is very important because you need to prepare them for staying with you long term. And then really you can do a systems-based approach, whichever discipline you come from. This is all I've been doing actually, and then involve your colleagues. But the most important thing is to slow down really. And then the questions about surveillance make more sense. So a lot of what I had practiced was handed over to me by Dr. Abhijit Guha, who ran his neurofibromatosis clinics in University of Toronto. He's no longer with us since about 2011. And we had done this over time. This is a lab and a few other people who are working with me. And we try to develop a lot of things for helping patients, improving their knowledge of their condition. This is the study we did. I won't go into that. I think a lot of this was touched upon by the previous speakers. I'll be happy to talk about those in isolation. I think I'll go over a few of the manifestations on my approach and my experience. Optic pathway gliomas. A lot is talked about that. Again, to make a long story short, if I look back, now this is from 2015. I think the numbers in our clinic may have been maybe double that, but the patterns are the same. So in my experience, you generally have these children who present in the first 1.5 years with a proptosis and an enhancing tumor on MRI. These are the ones that we tend to treat with chemotherapy, and we put them through a chemotherapy protocol with excellent results in terms of reduction in proptosis, but the visual prognosis sparing is questionable how much. So I generally counsel them that it's reduced visual prognosis. You have another type of optic pathway glioma, which is non-enhancing and involves predominantly more the optic chiasm and the more posterior optic pathways. If it's NF1, these patients, I just follow them over many years. If you see between 2013 and 2018, and just watch the visual acuity with my pediatric ophthalmologist, and they don't require anything. That is optic pathway. So that is optic pathway glioma. Now, in terms of MRI screening, I think there was a lot of discussion about that. With regard to optic pathway gliomas, that is one indication. But for me, and we did this in our study also, looking at visual acuity, when there are no visual symptoms and there's no proptosis, the vast majority of optic pathway gliomas we're not treating. We just follow them up on visual surveillance and an occasional MRI. And the most important thing is they stabilize, they don't grow after age 8. So the real one which needs management is the one which is proptotic and rapidly increasing in size. This is our other brain lesions. The most common thing is this thing, which many of you might know is known as an unidentified bright object. It's like the cafe au lait spot of the brain, which you're seeing on an MRI. It requires treatment. I have seen patients come to me after a biopsy was done and diagnosed as low-grade glioma. You have other gliomas which can occur in the neuraxis. There's no really good way to screen that. And so the patients come symptomatic. Generally, they're low-grade. I have had a patient who had a high-grade glioma, but screening would not have really picked up that. And you cannot really screen in individuals. Now, I do screen VHL patients with an MRI every 2 years. There's an indication for that within management. I do not screen NF1 patients with an MRI routinely, and I haven't found it very useful. The most dreaded thing is the malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor. I happen to be a peripheral nerve surgeon as well, so these come directly to me even otherwise. This is probably, the incidence is not insignificant. It's about 20%. I think, by the way, I think there was some discussion about the incidence of NF in India. As was mentioned, it's very difficult to do an incidence study. It requires a door-to-door survey within a population, like in a district. It would be interesting. But if you compare between different ethnic populations reported in the literature where that has been done, there's no real reason to suspect much of a difference between other populations. With respect to MPNSTs, I think the main message I would like to make is, this is one thing that all my patients I counsel about in the clinic. I tell them, just as I've been able to simplify it, telling them it's very important to explain to them that this is not that common, because I don't like to incite panic into patients, because you really have to maintain them for lifelong. They don't die unless you get an MPNST. They don't die quickly, and the average NF1 patient doesn't get it. So I like to avoid inducing fear and panic. And I tell them that, if you should do a self-examination of your limbs and body maybe once a month, and look for something the size of a bird egg, not a chicken egg, a bird egg. And these are what we call nerve sheath tumors like this. These are my NF1 patients. So if you pick it up in the peripheral nerve sheath tumor stage, the patient can really palpate it, and usually the most common presentation is neuropathic pain from pressing on the sensory fibers. I electively remove those to prevent degeneration into this, which is a malignant thing. Now, the mortality in my series for MPNST is quite high. When they come to us all with already malignant transformation, this is an MPNST in the ulnar nerve. We have to do a wide resection, and this is in a patient with the same in the sciatic nerve. We reconstruct the nerve. Even with the best wide resective surgery, the mortality rate is above 50. It's probably about 60, 70%. I do have patients who have survived long-term. The best screening is PET imaging, and this has been documented very well in MPNST literature. And so anytime you have a patient with something the size of a chicken egg or bird egg within the limb, which looks like a nerve sheath tumor, I get a PET before surgery. And the PET will never miss a malignant transformation. My my nuclear medicine colleagues told me that this is the highest uptake they've ever seen in any malignancy in MPNST. So the PET is very, very sensitive and specific for that. If it looks malignant, then my surgery changes, because we resect the entire tumor and we reconstruct the nerve. If the PET is negative for malignancy, we do a nerve-sparing surgery. And this is the management of that. One of the important things in NF is, I put all my NF patients through spine screening, because we have an extensive experience of undetected osseous softening of the spine, which can present with a sudden paraplegia, a paralysis due to trivial trauma. And this can really be avoided. This is a patient who had a bad kyphosis, and we just braced him, and the spine was fixed, and he's returned to normal neurological function. So NF1, though this is not common, it is reported, and people who run NF clinics are well familiarized with this. If they don't have it, they're unlikely to get it. It's not something I screen frequently. I probably screen once or twice in childhood, and then when they go through the growth spurt, I check again. Adults, probably just a few spot checks is enough. Plexiform neurofibroma, this is one very difficult thing to manage. These are some patients, it's all based on the location. It's all based on the location, the size, and the cosmetic deformity, and then also the functional deformity. In the interest of time, I won't show you this video, but this is a child who was born with NF1, no family history, and a large plexiform NF of the tongue, and it was impeding her ability to swallow and feed herself and even talk. I have a very experienced plastic surgeon here who has a dedicated interest in surgery for plexiform neurofibromas, Dr. Subramania Iyer, and he was able to resect it well. And recently I talked to the family about 8 years after surgery, and she is going to school and talking normally. No, it hasn't recurred. So surgical treatment is still an important thing in plexiform neurofibromas. I had a patient, so we have actually started MEK inhibition therapy here in our clinic. And with the permission of the parents, this is one of our patients with NF1. She's a very intelligent girl, and unfortunately, the large plexiform neurofibroma which is developed in the face is preventing her from going to school and attaining normal education. Very inspiring family and patient. She herself wants to go to school despite the cosmetic deformity. So again, what we did here was a combined therapy with surgical debulking followed by MEK inhibition. A little bit about the MEK inhibition. We were not able to procure solumetinib despite a lot of efforts. There's a lot of industrial barriers to that, and BCG, we got approval and things like that, but cost is the main issue. But this is an issue common to many other countries, and we noticed that there are other MEK inhibitors available in India. The one which we're using for this child is trametinib. And so with my medical oncology colleagues, we've started that, and she had a partial response both cosmetically and on volumetric MRI. They're quite happy with the functional improvement. If nothing else, we see that you may have seen patients with NF1 with the facial plexiform neurofibroma coming down to their chest. It's sagging that much. So these continue to progress throughout life. And at least with MEK inhibitor therapy, we can check it at what it is now. Combined with surgical therapy, we can ameliorate it. Obviously, we're never curing it, but we're focused on improving the quality of life for these patients who do not die from the disease. They have to be allowed to live a much more normal life. So that is one thing about MEK inhibition that we've actually started, and with like as in other NF centers throughout the world with promising results. So getting back to the cutaneous things, this is something which is often underlooked. No individual should be allowed to walk around like this. These are things which can be converted. You convert a pedunculated, unsightly skin lesion, which never becomes malignant, but prevents their normal integration into society. We put them under anesthesia, and we just do multiple excisions of these, and their cosmetic improvement and the satisfaction is quite significant. So this is something that NF clinics can club with their general surgeons, and patients are very happy to have that done so that they can get back to a more societal existence. I think in the interest of, so that kind of tells you the kinds of things. There are a lot more things about surveillance. I would be happy to maybe discuss that in questions. This is about a genotype-phenotype correlation study where we were trying to do some cluster analysis. I'll skip that and go quickly to NF2 and try to finish this in your time frame. NF2, for me, so there are, as was mentioned by the previous speakers, there's no direct relation between NF1 and NF2. A good analogy would be it's like tea and coffee. They're two separate things, but they kind of serve a similar purpose in society. And that, so NF1 and NF2, what I learn in NF1 helps me in NF2. What I learn in NF2 helps me in managing NF1. The important things are being that it's less common. It is more gradually progressive, and in my experience, NF2 patients over the next 10, 15, 20 years, their life degenerates more than NF1. To my knowledge, there has never been a reported malignancy in NF2. I may be wrong on that. We should never say never, but it is virtually unheard of. This is very important in counseling and talking to patients. I'll just share a few of my insights from many years of managing NF2. I won't go over the diagnostic criteria. We can answer that in questions. There are occasions that just today in clinic, I saw a patient who had bilateral sensory neural hearing loss, which is followed by our ENT and myself for the past 5 years, and now developed a single schwannoma with no family history. I still am not sure if she has NF2. I'm going to get genetic testing. So there are some occasional diagnostic dilemmas in NF2 earlier on in the teens and perhaps in 20s. That's about the only point there. This is one of the most important points I would like to mention to anybody who's venturing to start managing NF2. Hearing is perhaps the most, ultimately most important thing in the quality of life of the patient, because that's one of the most certain things that has a high risk of being lost over the years. And many times, if this is not managed, to any neurosurgeons who are out there listening, you do not manage an NF2 patient the way you manage a patient with a vestibular schwannoma. Vestibular schwannoma is the hallmark of NF2, agreed. But the patients are entirely different. The main point being that the NF2 patient, by a genetic event, is going to have both ears are at risk for losing hearing, and the quality of life once hearing is gone is severely devastated. So a vestibular schwannoma in my practice is never managed in NF2 unless there's significant loss of hearing, with the exception of now we're using drugs. So I'll go into that a little bit. And then, so this is my, when it comes to vestibular schwannoma, my dictum in my NF clinic is primum non nocere. So you do not harm the natural hearing, because we do not, as neurosurgeons, though we might feel we give some hearing preservation in an early surgical removal, it is never as good as the natural history of hearing. And we are very comfortable managing larger tumors after hearing is lost. And these never become malignant. Now, in non-vestibular schwannomas and meningiomas, it can be based purely on symptomatology, and should be. So again, coming back to the initial dictum, which I tried to share, is that we want to minimize the number of interventions in the patient's lifespan. So we should only be selecting, and there's no risk of malignant transformation, so we should only be selecting symptomatic lesions. And here in NF2, like the question was there about whole body MRI, I'll be happy to discuss that. I don't really believe in that in NF1. In NF2, a CNS neuraxis MRI, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, is very helpful as at baseline. And then similar to my VHL practice, I would probably prefer an MRI once in 2 years so that we can see which lesions tend to grow. And then it helps me and the patient prepare for an eventual possible surgery there based on the symptoms plus the volumetric growth rate. Now, what we do in our clinic and lab is we can do volumetric MRI. So we don't actually just look at the images and say, this is growing. Where we have a doubt, we do volumetric analysis on software and say, okay, this lesion has increased by 37% in 2 years. So that gives me more confidence that that is the one that we have to focus on. And again, none of these things progress rapidly, even in NF2. That is one very important thing. It's just a few, at the most, clinic visits in 3 to 4 months is probably enough to get a feeling. And it's good for that will naturally happen once you begin to follow patients longitudinally. I guess in the interest of time, this is a patient who came from Africa with sensory for a cochlear implant, thinking that he had deafness. He didn't know he had NF2, was diagnosed to have NF2, and we debulked the lesions. Now, one of the important things is communicating with the NF2 patient in clinic. They cannot hear you. And talking to another person, and that person just eliminating all the terminology and the information to two simple things doesn't help the patient who has NF2. First of all, they have a normal intelligence. They can many times speak pretty well, and they need to really understand. So I make it a point to write and communicate to them directly. So this is very important for your patients. Then you will get a lot more compliance with the long-term, and you will actually understand the symptoms better. We can ask them questions, what is paining you, how is your balance, and things like that. So establish a very good, even though they may be at a stage where they have lost hearing, you can communicate, they're completely normal. Just write for them, type for them, and take some time. Seeing an NF2 patient really takes time for that. You have to set aside some time. It really helps tremendously. And it can motivate them to get back to a normal life.
Dr. Pillai, sorry to interrupt you. I think we're running out of time.
Sure.
If we can take another 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah, thank you so much.
This is my champion patient. She has dealt with NF2 now for 17 years. She has been deaf for about 12 years. She's completed her BCom, MCom, and her MBA, and is working accounts for many companies and being completely deaf. So if you really motivate them, they can get back to society. And she has had this many procedures, as you see on the right side, including up to hydrocephalus. This is a patient who recently came to me with bilateral vestibular schwannomas and this large brainstem lesion. We put him on Avastin because this is a lesion which I do not want to touch and devastate him. And we showed volumetric tumor reduction. And now in 2 years, he's much symptomatically much better. We haven't operated on him yet. His hearing is getting preserved. Now, the difficult thing is transitioning him over to a dose that we can maintain for the long term. Again, cost issues can be there. This is our research in NF2. I'm going to skip that completely. But to make a long story short, we may have an extracellular pathway which might help develop some CSF-mediated therapeutics in the future. I would be very enthusiastic to. I've been talking to some international colleagues who could maybe take it further for that. I think I'll conclude with that. Yes, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pillai. This was very, very helpful, and thank you for sharing amazing work. I think for all the speakers, I will take away one point that you made at the very beginning of your conversation, which was that you want to normalize the patient. You want to let them know that you are the same person you are, despite of having the NF1, right? And I think that is a very important message today for the summit. Is that we help patients normalize. We help them, understand that this doesn't change them as a person and that the management is possible. And I think least intervention is better because it helps you keep the patient with you long term. Unfortunately, Dr. Lokesh Ningappa had to leave, but I do have one or two questions. If Dr. Shefali, if you would be kind enough to answer those today, I think they're important questions for some of these family members. I wanted to understand, as a child transitions, as NF is something that remains with the person for the rest of their life, right, from childhood to an adult. As the child transitions into adolescence, what are some of the challenges or important screenings that you think, or important questions that you want to address for a child as that transition happens?
Yeah, Nisha, that is what Nisha, I was mentioning initially, that there are certain symptoms which are going to appear. It's going to evolve over years, and during adolescence time, they may have more, learning disabilities. They may have some attention deficit hyperactivity things, and in addition to that, you will have to be looking out for tumors. That surveillance also has to go on, so that will be important. But what I feel is that keeping in mind the medical issues of hypertension and the malignant transformation of the plexiform neurofibromatous, or like just mentioned right now about the malignant nerve sheath tumors and all, they generally are going to come around the adolescent times. But in addition, the child may also have the growing adolescent may also have issues because of the skin lesions and feeling feeling of anxiety and depression in addition because of their handling. Because if they are in any exposed areas and they have to go for swimming and all those stuff in their quality of life, so that also they need also counseling. I mean, the psychological counseling besides the organic things which we are looking forward, and obviously we are trying to understand the genetics and accordingly go ahead, and also as their evolution of the various symptoms. But I think also we have to ensure that their coping strategies taught and psychological support in addition, because anyway, a teenager growing up has a lot of issues without any medical issues. Absolutely. And with this medical issue, which has going to be either visible on the skin, which causes a lot of peer problems with them, and obviously the fear of the malignancy and other things, and otherwise tumors. I mean, and if they are coming and they are in the exposed areas becomes an issue. So I think besides the medical point, we need to have the psychological support, especially.
Absolutely. And I think that raises an important question of, also introducing the both genetic counseling, but also psychosocial counseling, and I think involving therapists in these clinics, because like you said, a lot of, and I think Dr. Pillai, one of your patients that you shared with us, having that deformity that is so visible for a child or for an adolescent to be then, be able to normalize, go to school, have normal friends, can be very challenging. And I think including therapists and including these counseling sessions and also addressing this to the schools, I think is another important point, is that how much are the schools aware about the challenges the child can face, and how can they normalize this for the child itself, right? Because with all the therapies, the treatments, they will be missing some amount of school as well.
But Nisha, one more thing. I think it's you cannot have the school cannot have sessions talking directly for neuro NF, but generally they should be having some sessions for all the students, and also in the parents one periodically, that the children are everybody's not same. They are only neurotypicals which they are seeing, but there is a neurodiversity and there are a lot of medical issues. So they have to understand so that the other children who are not having any problem also learn to adapt. Because what happens is what is a big problem which comes up, especially with our neurodevelopmental challenges which come up. And many of these patients, around 29% also have autism, this NF. So but otherwise many times the parents of the children who are okay, they have a problem of their child interacting. So there is this stigma which is there. I think you need to expand the stigma. So destigmatization of they should be told that any kind of medical ailment a child has, it is not that there is contagious or something. It's going to reduce or impede on your child's development. In fact, if a child is seeing another child who has an issue, they should be helping develop empathy, and they will be growing into a better human being and a better person. So I think that part of it, with destigmatization and we're making awareness in the schools and even in the public places, because I remember very vividly, if you remember, there was that Satyamev Jayate series which had come on the TV, and I vividly remember a child who was adopted who has really bad skin lesions. That adopted child's mother had shared that somebody had spitted on the child in a mall. I have not forgotten about it till now. So I mean, how can anybody do that? So something like that, we have to have awareness, a general people's awareness. There should be general articles written so that they should understand that there are many conditions which are there, which may look on skin and all, and even otherwise, and they are not contagious, and everybody has the equal right to everything in society. So I think that humanistic aspect is missing completely in our India. Yeah, Mr. Pillai.
I'm very happy you brought up these points, because as you said, if all of our efforts in this session is to improve the life of people with NF, for the amount of effort you put in, if you were to do these things which you said, improving the awareness, and like you said, that it's just a mental block that these individuals are just like us. They just have a genetic trait which presents. I mean, you might have a small nose, I might have a big nose. It's only that. And any efforts we put into that would probably help more than research, even lab research. Okay, because it immediately improves things. And I saw it in front of my eyes, like this child, she still continued to go to the same school. In fact, there were issues in that school brought up by teachers and even people. But then over time, they worked with it. It's a challenge to the school system, the class, and the teachers. But a challenge is a step forward many times. And like you said, if we put efforts in that, then once you have a few victories, then it becomes more and more the norm.
Absolutely.
I think that would be wonderful. That any effort, and it doesn't take money really. It just takes. It's not like research, it is, and that's where it is, because any efforts to reduce the stigma on this, and if individuals themselves do it, but not everyone can.
Yeah. And as genetic counselors, this is one of the most important things that we spend time doing, is that we spend a lot of time speaking to parents about normalizing their situation, about helping them identify and understand what are the challenges they are facing, and to improve that inclusivity in the society as well as the school for a child. So we, as counselors, I think definitely see those challenges, and a lot of times when it's familial, we see a lot of parental guilt, shame, and also children facing the trauma of not being able to include themselves in a normal society. So I think awareness, and I do agree, I think a lot of work has to be done, and I think this will go a long way for parents, is advocating for families, helping them normalize their situation, and also building more awareness within schools and communities to then include more and more of these people in mainstream societies, whether it's with NF or with a child who has autism or any other disease for that matter of fact.
Nisha,
Yes, ma'am.
one more thing, there's another end of it. Sometimes the parents only doesn't accept the child, and they discriminate against their own children.
Yes.
So I think they have to understand this was not this child's fault that this child has a particular problem. So I think, in certain families, they are not only accepting the child. I know somebody who's kept their own child with Down syndrome 32 years in their house. They've never taken the child out. So all those things are happening in educated families, So we have to understand that it is the right of every child and every individual to, see the ray of sunshine, go out in the society, and we are actually, everybody has the equal right to life.
Absolutely.
With the
I think
very
these
true.
clinicians can really play an important point in the clinic, because if we just take double the time we normally do for the average patient, we can slowly give them confidence that it is possible. I have NF1 patients who have come to me for lesion removal prior to their marriage, or lawyers, engineers, and integrate. So such people like that, of course, it's largely based on the cutaneous burden, the stigma. That's one important thing also. So, but as clinicians, you can help reduce that.
Right.
Absolutely. Dr. Pillai, also with seizures. The stigma is with cutaneous lesion, number one. Number two is the seizures, and they hide during the time of marriage. And I think when you're counseling, we have to tell them not to hide, because it's going to come up later on anyway. So you have to anyway tell in advance only. There are a lot of problems in marriages otherwise. So, why create another problem from the beginning and the fear? So I think they have to be truthful. So all those counselings have to happen also. That they have to tell. Dr. Modi would be more experienced because he handles those people who are in the marriageable age. But the initial family, I like to counsel the families for any of these chronic illnesses. I try to do a family-centric counseling and actually try to make them understand that nobody is doing anybody a favor. Everybody has the equal right to life. Dr. Modi, they hide now sometimes so that we can cause catastrophic consequences later on. And we should have transitional care has to be provided, and from a pediatrician to an adult neurologist, formally the child has to be transferred. Otherwise they are at loss. It is just not like a paper referral. It has to be a gradually a thing, and will have to be for some time, both will have to see, and then it will have to be gradually with respect and with their dignity to be transferred, just not casual writing. So I think for all these chronic things
this is,
in which they're growing up, transitional care from a pediatric neurologist to an adult neurologist. I meant that.
That is true, ma'am. So this is a model that I saw at CHOC at the Philadelphia, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where they actually see the children for 3 years. So until 18, they are still at the pediatric center, but until they're 22, they actually follow up with both doctors, the adult as well as the child. And within the 3 years is when the transition actually happens. And from 22, they get followed only with the adult neurology. So I think that transitional care is something that's really important. And another point that you brought up, which I think I'd like to share quickly, my experience of, counseling for a lot of families with, understanding recurrence risk and helping them identify the genetic diagnosis. We have seen a lot of couples and a lot of families who've, like you said, trying to hide the fact that somebody has a genetic diagnosis, or the reverse, where the female often is getting discriminated against marriage. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes testing is also happening without consent, which is something that we keep raising as a red flag, and we do not allow to proceed, for the testing. And we always have both the parents or both the partners be present for the testing, because a lot of times the testing is happening without the consent of the patient, which is absolutely unethical to do, and does more harm in that place, right? And then a lot of times you also see that they are not even told that it can be cancerous, or that it's something that can really get passed on. So these are some of very important questions that we have raised during counseling sessions and had difficult conversations with families, so that it brings them awareness that these are the right steps that you want to take going forward. I really appreciate all the conversations that we have had today. I have one final rapid fire question for all the panelists here. This is, I want to understand your thoughts as a practitioner and as an expert in NF. What is the way forward that you think, to improve access to treatment, promote research, and reduce barriers for better management for families with NF? So if you can shed some quick thoughts, on this, is how do we move forward from where we are today? I think we've definitely come a long way, but what is the way forward? Dr. Shefali, I'll start with you.
I think we have to empower the pediatricians that that they are just not neurocutaneous markers, and it's just not. I mean, they have multi-system evaluation has to be done. So they have to be empowered first to understand, and then the idea of a holistic evaluation and surveillance. Because if the surveillance part is missed, it's very, very, very difficult. I think that is something important. And yes, the research has to be there. And the research is currently going on with the, RAS inhibition, MEK inhibition, and tyrosine kinase inhibition. And you already have this elizumab, which was approved basically for the plexiform neurofibromatosis, which was not and even in pediatrics it has been tried. So a lot of those studies are going on. I mean, that is there. So but the only thing I feel, and also I think that we should be encouraging that they should be the parent and support groups should be there, and they themselves should form, because they learn maximum from amongst each other how to handle. So like we have also made some Telegram groups like for autism, and also the parents are discussing among themselves how they manage, and we are there just standing just to facilitate some queries if they have to us. So I think it will be very important. And other thing is, as Dr. Modi very rightly pointed out, but you cannot have NF clinics because you need TS clinics also. You will need so many clinics. So I mean, I tried for many things. So I just think we should have a close network, as he mentioned, that so that when we are getting, see, if you go to CHOP, you go, there's a CP clinic. One day, everybody's on one floor and everybody's seen, all multidisciplinary. It doesn't work in India, because of the numbers. I mean, that we want, but, we can't reach. So at least we should have that on that particular day when they're coming. There are places, they are everywhere in their own places because they're not coming in the same boardroom kind of thing. So at least it should be facilitated that they go and see in one place so that they don't have to come again and again. And they should have a group, they can have group meetings to discuss on their patients periodically. That can be done. I know it is not possible to sit. It is happening only in the malignancies that you have tumor boards because they have to decide the management at one point of time. Rest is not working out. So I think, and one has not to give up. Nobody's fault about it. Yeah.
That is very true. Dr. Ashok Pillai, your thoughts, please.
I think as a quick answer to your, I think I've been associated with other societies dedicated to these kind of things. That is a combined approach of awareness, improving standard of care guidelines, and also research. I'm involved in other societies. So generally, once a society, at present, there's no such society for these things in India, to my knowledge. We had started something for VHL, and that was more of a patient support group. It's not really a dedicated society. But NF, you have the numbers. So I would say such a group who have other people, but that already implies that you're going to be running NF clinics. Now, when I say NF clinics, having done it for a long time, I would say that it need not be a certain day. It's more a center for patients who know that they're getting care from a group of clinicians who have an interest. There's no single one NF person. We all know that. But at least a person who has a dedicated interest, and the interest implies that you link with other international societies and you learn from each patient, and then over time it improves. So I think a group of, special interest action group, whatever you want to term it, and it could be just called for NFs. That would be, that's how we had the International Society meeting here. That was specifically NF1 and NF2, and rasopathies also, but the 90% of the discussion and work was NF1 and NF2. And it is possible to designate that, and then that allows for some continuity within the clinical and the support, and what do you want to call it, the support group staff, not the people with NF. Mm-hmm. And then that you have a platform upon which, so then you start having meetings and you start sharing cases and you start learning and growing, and then you develop a network. Because honestly speaking, managing NF1, I really feel you need dedicated groups. I wouldn't say centers. The numbers are huge, and so there's a lot of mismanagement. I'm not pointing fingers at an individual, just because the vast majority of patients who come to my NF clinic or VHL clinic have been managed by other people. And there are many things which I would not have operated on. And there are things that happen because, and it's not pointing fingers at one person, it's just because it requires a kind of a disease-based approach. And this is the trend world over. So we either do it now or later, to be honest with you. So that would be probably the best thing. And then through that, obviously, the things of improving things in society naturally happen, because then you have events and then you raise awareness and you can, it's like you said. And then parents are already ahead of us in this, to be honest with you. They have, and they know the treatment better many times than you. They're just searching for the place that.
Very true.
That's how I get the majority of my NF patients. I mean, they contact the CTF, the Children's Tumor Foundation, they come here. So it's either you do it now or later.
Right. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Dr. Modi, your thoughts, please.
Just a quick one. Already, all of us have echoed the same point. Probably support groups are the best way forward. And you know, with the kind of explosion of these electronic media and it is a small world, and I think that is the only way to spread the awareness and to what people discuss among themselves, the patients, when they start forming groups and discuss their problems and the faith and the kind of cure they get, that probably spreads more knowledge and awareness about particular disease. As is happening in many of the neurological disorders, this may be a small group, but if I mean, say, given a choice, that will be one of the best things to happen. As Dr. Shopile had already shown many success stories. We have our success stories. So combining together these success stories can be great motivation for any patients and improving awareness also. That's what I feel as of now.
Absolutely.
In systems where we are working and in India where you cannot have good centers to take care of them independently. We don't have any support. It is always the family support. So the more this kind of awareness is there, the more families they connect together, probably they will be able to. You know, one of them is and neurofibromatosis, a 70-year female our staff member. She brings and every year, every 6 months to me and say, but there is nothing to, you know, nobody is there to look after. She is worried. So there is no support there. See, there is some kind of a group, and then automatically, if that group is big enough, then there's so much philanthropy is there, which can actually take care of these patients. That is what I feel. At best,
thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Anusha, your final thoughts, please.
Actually, stigma is associated with many genetic disorders, not just with NF1. So many families carry that stigma, and because of that, they may avoid social gatherings or may be unkind to the child having that disorder. So the first step would be to increase the acceptability in the society for the patients with genetic disorders, and the acceptability should also be in the schools. So if first in the school they are made aware that these type of children do exist and they should be caring for these fellow human beings, and they should be helping them in dealing with the problems rather than discriminating against. So that is one thing. So if you increase the general awareness through the media and in the schools, then that can go a long way in decreasing the stigma. The second thing is multidisciplinary clinic. At least in tertiary care centers, one can have multidisciplinary clinics, maybe every 6 months or 1 year, not necessarily every month. And it is not that if we do a multidisciplinary clinic, they cannot come any other day. So if they have a problem, they can come any other day to the general clinic. But if anyone is interested in attending that multidisciplinary clinic, it will be better for them, because in that, I suppose all departments involved will be there, and especially the psychologist or the psychiatrist who can also do the family counseling, so that the problems which they anticipate, they are more, they accept that thing that the problems will occur, and that there is not much anxiety or guilt regarding the child or in the family regarding the marriage of that child. So they have different concerns. So everyone should be empathetic and sympathetic to these patients, and proper appointment should be given for further monitoring, and proper guidance should be given for the further prevention or for follow-up. So in general, you see the intolerance in the society has increased, and the doctors, if they also become intolerant, then what can be done for the patients? So the basic empathy and sympathy should be the proper evaluation, management, and proper monitoring is done, and if the counseling is done to remove their fears, then the patients will be in better position, and even the outcomes can become better for these patients.
Been a great conversation, and I really appreciate all the time that all of you have taken today to have this discussion. I'd like to end this conversation with just the thought that I think we're going forward with ideas on further improving access to treatments, along with that also improving inclusivity and reducing the stigma as well as the concerns people have with NF. So hoping that we will be able to form better groups that are stronger in advocating patients and for families with NF. Thank you so much, everybody. And I hope everybody has a good weekend. And I'm really appreciative of the time that you've all given today. Thank you for the inspirational conversation.
Thank you.